We are returning to open session. Announcement of action taken in closed session.
Positions of new hires, K through third grade teachers certificated, Dundee Golf, that's sixth grade teacher certificated, Danielle Mozabatier, elementary, IS team member, three PBIS team members, stipend positions, Captain John, 2 at elementary, Jessica Reed, Casey O'Neill, and Lauren Billings. Testing and data and inclusion coordinator stipend, Adriana Winslow, district-wide. Success for all facilitator stipend, High River, Cooper Elementary. Summer school administrator, certificated, David Appleford Jr., district-wide. Summer school substitute, certificated, Douglas Beckstead Jr., district-wide. Transfers, behavior specialist, classified, Casey O'Neill, district-wide. Backfill attendance secretary, classified, Mary Kerwig, Cooper Valley High School. Second, third grade teacher, certificated, Mr. Gibbons. Orleans Elementary, behavioral class teacher, certificated, Kristen Wright, Trinity Valley. English language curriculum and literacy coach, certificated, William Romas, district-wide. Literacy paraprofessional, classified, Hunter Schaefer. Jack Norton, instructional assistant special needs, classified, Hunter Schaefer, Jack Norton. Ground supervisor, classified, Hunter Schaefer, Jack Norton. Resignations, teacher, certificated, Orleans Elementary School. Terminations, custodial, Jack Norton, classified. Food specialist, classified, Jack Norton.
Okay. And there was no other action in closed session. During public comment, during this portion of the meeting, members of the public may address the board on matters not on the agenda. Such matters are within the subject jurisdiction of the board. Members of the public may address the board regarding items on this agenda immediately prior to their being discussed by the board. Time limits, generally 3 minutes per speaker, 20 minutes per subject, will be imposed by the board president. The board president may rule on the appropriateness of a topic if the topic would more suitably be addressed at a later time. The president may indicate the time and place when it should be presented. Do we have any
no public comments?
No public comments. And what about non-agenda items?
No public comments.
No public comments at all. Okay, we'll move into the superintendent's board report. 6A, Shin Green East Shore Consulting, LLC, facilities and finance presentation.
Okay, thanks, Shin, for coming. We have Shin here in person, and we're going to get, we'll start right away with this presentation, and then I'll do a couple of my components afterwards.
Excellent. Pleasure to be here with everyone, and safe to say, you know, there's a lot of stuff to talk about on this topic of the facilities, the financing associated with it. A fairly lengthy presentation here today. That being said, there's various components. There's a background component where we kind of talk a little bit about the history. I know many of you know that. I know we have some newer board members, but there's a lot to discuss there. There's components as to potential pathways forward for a pair of goals, and we'll spell those all out. Goal 1 would be settling our accounts, so to speak, with the state and getting ourselves into a better fiscal position in terms of the potential for the state looking to take money back related to prior projects. And then the secondary piece is looking to potentially complete the iTech facility. Those are kind of our two, I think, primary goals in our mind and what we're kind of working toward. But there is some good news in this presentation to share as well in terms of what the district has achieved. There's also I think, some good news with respect to potential pathways forward. And we're looking forward to sunshine this with you tonight and hopefully finding a consensus on the pathway forward so that we can finalize some things and hopefully begin to actualize what we believe will be some of the solutions over the next handful of months. With that being said, we'll start with the background. I don't want to spend too much time on the background if we don't have to, but if there are important questions or things that are unclear for people, very happy to answer those and delve deeper into it. And just for reference, I'm one member of your team. There's plenty of other people who are involved in this that are not here tonight, but I'm just from the finance side and kind of been, I guess, for lack of a better description, the point person of the team for a little while now in terms of communicating back during these times when we're not all able to meet and convene as regularly as we used to. With that being said, I will go ahead and go to the first page of the background, and you guys know the schools we served, et cetera. This really starts with a story that kind of goes back to 2008 in my mind when the district embarked on some facilities modernization projects using a locally approved general obligation bond. Those bond proceeds plus some state aid money coming from the State School Facilities Program, or SFP, that's a common acronym you'll hear me use a lot, the SFP, through their modernization program. We're going to start modernizing and bringing the schools kind of up to the modern kind of criteria. Shortly after that work commenced, there were some significant mold issues that were discovered in the construction, really present at most of the campuses, and really resulted in the need to expand the scope of work that was going to be done. No longer were we just talking about replacing windows, upgrading systems, but now we were looking at a much higher degree of construction, both in replacing items as well as mitigating the mold issues. Certainly that drove the costs up, and with those increases in cost, the district opted in 2015 to enter the SFP's financial hardship program. In other words, what that means is that the cost of the projects that you have to engage in greatly exceed the resources that are really able to be raised by the district. And in doing that, the state increases its contribution for the basic sort of stuff that one requires. And so theoretically under hardship, the SFP provides funding for 100% of project costs, but only at state determined funding levels, which really reflects statewide averages. So, some pictures of the kind of issues that were encountered when they opened the walls up for modernization, and continuing on our background here. Just prior to entering hardship, the district issued a COP in 2015. The 2015 certificates of participation provided financing, and that's essentially a financing mechanism where the district promises general fund or other operational revenues in the future to repay debt so that you can receive money up front. And that 2015 COP was part of the mix of funding that was used to provide matching money for some of these projects before the district entered into the hardship phase. Once hardship was entered into, really all funding that you kind of have at that point in time in theory has been spoken for. And so you're really kind of working with the state to determine how much money you get. And usually you get that money back, not as an advancement, but as a reimbursement for things that have been done. Usually it tends to trail. It doesn't always lead the projects that you're going to engage in. So sometimes the SFP does create some cash flow issues. In theory, to solve those cash flow issues, in 2016, the district issued its 2016 COPs. That will be a second set of certificates of participation in the amount of about $11.2 million. The 2016 COPs were authorized using a state prescribed resolution. That resolution basically says that those COPs are advancements of state money. And once you receive that state money, those COPs are to be repaid. So it's a cash flow mechanism for the 2016, and the resolution is very specific about that. In theory, you take these COPs out, you use the money to advance what you'll receive from the state later. Once the state finally pays you the money that you're owed, you pay the COPs off, everything is done. Usually that's how it would work, but for the reality that construction costs in your part of the world run a lot higher than the average in the state. So, based upon the language in the resolution, the 2016 COPs were a bridge financing, but if they were not repaid, they would be considered available funds. Once they become considered available funds, that counts against your hardship allotment. So to the extent you have funds available, they will reduce your hardship for those available funds. It reduces what the state puts into your projects. So it was very important to try to make sure that those COPs, the 2016 in particular, were treated not as available funding, but as advancement or cash flow for state funds that would come at a future date. Takes us into our phase one projects, and this is, kind of taking a little bit of a step back on the calendar, but when we talk about these phase one projects, really, when we went from modernization to the remediation and dealing with mold issues, it was clear there would be a lot more work needed, and it was envisioned that the work would be done over somewhere between 3 or 4 phases. With phase one commencing in 2014, this is when the mold was discovered, kind of really changed things for the district. And by 2016, as you were completing the phase one projects, again, not yet in hardship status, you had used about $8 million of district resources, which were committed for school facility program matching funds. As you were wrapping up phase one, going into hardship, that increased some of the funding that was available. At the end of the day, that $8 million actually got the district about $25.6 million in SFP funding. So you got multiples of your kind of matching funds at the end of the day from the state. But unfortunately, the overall cost for the first phase of projects was about $1.9 million beyond your contribution plus the state contribution. And so we had a overage in the cost beyond the resources. And usually when you have that happen, someone will raise a hand and say, wait a second, these projects are costing more than they're supposed to. When we pay this COP off with these monies you give us, we're going to be $1.9 million short. But at that time, the administration and everyone decided that, we have multiple phases to do here. Let's not draw the line after phase one. Let's go ahead and go into the next phase, and we'll need advancement of money again. State, would it be okay with you if we, use these monies again? And we'll get to that in a second. For anyone that's interested, there's a table here of the various pieces of the phase one projects. Fourth column over from the left is the district contribution for each of those projects. And right next to that third column over would be the total project cost as estimated by the state. And the difference is what the state would send you with their final fund releases, the 25.6. In reality, it wasn't 33.9. It was more like $35 million that the projects actually ended up costing. So that's where the overages come from. Just making sense to everyone? Do I need to revisit? Everyone's good. Great. We go into phase two. As we're completing phase one projects at the end of 2016, initiating the next phase, we granted authority by the state to, instead of repaying that 2016 COP, essentially reusing that COP sources. So you got the money back from the state, instead of sending it to pay off the cash flow, the state said, no, you don't have to pay off the cash flow yet. We know you've got a future cash flow need. Go ahead and reuse that money. And so the state sends money in, you don't pay the COP off, but you have the cash flow necessary to move into phase two. You commence phase two. We're totally in hardship now. There is no district contribution anymore. These are in theory all state funded projects. And as we're going through phase two, a lot of money on the table from the state, $36.1 million goes into phase two. That's in addition to the 25 we talked about for phase one, again, through hardship. But unfortunately, similar to phase one, the total costs were not 36.1. They were more like 42.8, about $6.7 million above the state funding estimates or what was allocated to the district for those projects. So now as we wrap up phase two, you have an underage on phase one of about 1.9 plus an underage on phase two of about 6.7. Grand total, you're about 8.6, in the red, so to speak, on these projects. We don't have any inkling of that as a district because, no one's kind of drawing a line and saying, let's close all this stuff out. We're instead looking at the next phase of projects, thinking about cash flow, et cetera. And really, as part of that, the district, looks to its voters and seeks a second GEO bond in 2016, which was successful, to kind of add to the mix of available funding. Moving on from that, there's another list of the phase 2 projects and kind of what was done and what you received from the state. Again, those are not the true costs, those are the state estimated costs. Your costs were certainly higher than that. As we're wrapping up phase 2, moving into phase 3, early in 2018, it appears there was some additional request made to the state to potentially cover what was envisioned as a possible 4th phase. There was still some testing of facilities going on at that time, and there was a feeling that there would be additional issues found. Good news is that testing came back negative, and so I don't believe there ever had to be a 4th phase at the end of the day. But conversations were broached with the state to kind of warn them that this might be coming down the line. And I think it created a little bit of confusion at the state. And so that resulted in the state really kind of saying, wait a second, what's going on here? We thought this was interim financing. We're confused. The state also got a letter, which I'm not quite sure why it was written, by the insurer, the third-party insurance company that provided coverage on your 2016 COPs, kind of indicating that they had some concerns. Very rare to see an insurer proactively kind of write that letter, especially to a state. But for some reason that happened in this case. And this kind of, in June of 2018, resulted in the state having some confusion about what the district was trying to do, intending to do, and really saying, wait a second, we don't know that the COP is, this 2016 COP is really bridge financing. We're finding out that some of the project costs are running over. We believe this might be a material inaccuracy. And a material inaccuracy is something that the state finds specific to the school facilities program, and it's generally reserved for entities willfully misrepresenting their funding that's available to enhance or gain the school facilities program. So let's say, if I was a district that wanted to play a game with the state, I might transfer a bunch of money to a different fund and say, I have no resources, state, give me money, I need it now. Knowing darn well I transferred resources for the purpose of making it look a certain way. That's the type of stuff that material inaccuracies are usually reserved for. Folks who are doing things like that or have no real intention of building a project to the scale they're talking about, those sorts of things, where you're kind of willfully misrepresenting or quite honestly lying to the state about what you intend to do. I find no record of the district ever intending to do that, but the material inaccuracy finding was being levied, and it carries some pretty stiff penalties. If it is found to be true that you committed a material inaccuracy, you will immediately have to repay any state funds that they believe you are not eligible for. At that time, that would have been $11.2 million of the 2016 certificates of participation that would have been due pretty much immediately upon the finding that material inaccuracy being valid. So a lot of work was done, a lot of time spent in Sacramento to try to stop that from happening. Some additional repercussions is it precludes you from participating in the school facility program, and any participation that you do in the future would involve significant amounts of audits and additional work to get your money. It's not where you want to be in any stretch of your imagination. It's just not a good situation and really precludes your ability to use the school facility program as other districts would. So at the time, the administration, consultants, and everyone were down in Sacramento, kind of just trying to get the material inaccuracy off the table. And what we did at that point in time was we provided the state, specifically the Office of Public School Construction, who is in charge of kind of the school facility program allocations, and said, look, here is a plan of finance for how the district will be repaying the 2016 COP. Now, that plan of finance had some holes in it because there were not enough resources left by that point in time to pay everything off. But we wanted to show them that this was not an intent to necessarily game the system, but rather a reality that project costs were coming in more than the state was allocating, and the district had to complete projects because one of the conditions of receiving state funding is you have to complete the project. So it kind of puts you in a dilemma of what to do. It's a for lack of a better description, a catch-22 where either choice kind of puts you in a bad place. But that being said, after presenting the plan of finance, the material inaccuracy did come off the table, and the district did proceed with phase 3 of its projects, which was really at that time, after determining that there wouldn't be a 4th phase, the end of the line, last of the projects, last of the remediations and modernizations to deal with. And so, with the material inaccuracy tabled, the district engages in phase 3. District receives about $22.5 million in hardship funding for those phase 3 projects. But again, we have costs that come in above what the state average estimates are. And we were about $6 million over on phase 3, with one project in phase 3 still remaining to be completed, which was the iTech building. That being said, the iTech building was a replacement, but we clearly were in the same position we were on the prior phases. And so where things were standing, you add it all up, 6 million on phase 2, 6 and change on, 6 million on phase 3, 6 and change on phase 2, 1.9. You're getting north of $14 million of encroachment, $14 million more in project costs than what was provided by the state and other funding sources. And the money had to be paid from somewhere, and was really paid by using the borrowing resources that the district had at that time, which were the COP funds, the cash flow funds. But there wasn't a good way to backfill the general fund or other sources. So you ended up kind of using up the resources that would be necessary. And seeing this problem, the board becoming abundantly aware and clear of these cost overruns, which really are a function of your remote location and the difficulty of deploying construction teams out here. There's not a hotel that's close by. There's not a lumberyard that's close by. Everything has to be trucked in. And for some of your more remote sites, trucked quite a ways out and fairly carefully. The standard kind of equipment can't just fly down the road and do things there. So there's good reason why the costs are more than the average. But that being said, the district board realized you had some choices. You could take any of your remaining funding sources that you had left and apply those, plus about $3.2 million of general obligation bond authorization you had left at that time, and any of the other COP funds that you had left, and finish the iTech, and then simply be subject to repaying the state for the overage that the COP generated at $11.2 million. Or you could pull the plug on the iTech building and put that on pause and simply use the funds that you had to try to repay the 2016 COP and avoid the state wanting its money back from you for the available funds that were used. The district's board decided to pause the iTech building. So we took that off the table and really focus on just repaying the COP. And so we took the $3.2 million of general obligation bond authorization that remained from the 2016 and prior election and applied that immediately to repaying 2016 COPs. Took that balance down from 11.2 to about 6.9 million. Really was the fiscally prudent thing to do at that time. And seeking to repay that 2016 COP, for every dollar that we pay really saves you $2, because you have to repay the COP no matter what. It just becomes a question of how much of that COP the state insists that you send back to them for their contribution on the hardship side. So let's say, we today have $6.9 million in COP. We do nothing else. The state says, okay, those were available funds. You have to repay the 6.9 over time, but the state will also tell you to cut a check back to them for 6.9 million in addition to repay the hardship funding that they gave you, that COP in theory would have been available funds for. So it's $2 for every one. Once the COP is out, there's no way to make it go away on one side, but not the other. You end up in each case with any dollar of 2016 COP that remains really costing you $2. That's just the reality of it. And even beyond the material inaccuracy, when we close out projects and audit them, that reality of that math, that $2 for one will remain. If they close out and audit these projects and say, well, we see the COP was never repaid, whatever the balance of that COP is, the district will have to write a check to the state for that amount. There are some options to finance that with the state, but fundamentally, you will owe back whatever remains outstanding once they determine these projects to be done in that 2016 COP. If it's $10 that remains outstanding, then you'll owe the state back 10. If it's $6 million, then it will be $6 million. But that is a reality that we have to deal with and something we have to face. Really, during phase 3, under all circumstances, there wasn't a great choice. There were not sufficient resources to complete the ITEC with what we had on hand at the end of phase 3, nor were there sufficient resources to fully repay the 2016 COP. But we did make efforts in the plan of finance. We did pay off 3.2, I think, showing that goodwill and the ability to start drawing down on that COP and taking those actions got the state to table the material inaccuracy finding. So the more harsh penalties went away. But we still have the problem of the cash flow and funding and kind of figuring out how to close all of those gaps. So here's your phase 3 projects for anyone that's interested. These are, not want projects. These are critical projects. We're talking 10 classrooms at Hoopa Elementary, 11 classrooms at the high school, 4 classrooms at Orleans, a pair of classrooms and a library that's probably in use today at Trinity Oaks. And Wichipec, the entire campus was essentially redone. So let's talk a little bit about the initial plan of finance that we shared with the state. This was our first kind of conversation when they insisted the COP be repaid. The initial plan of finance was presented to the Office of Public School Construction and really sought to identify and lay on the table every potential conceivable resource that the district could apply, while still endeavoring to also find resources to complete the ITEC replacement. OPSC accepted that plan of finance and tabled that material inaccuracy with the with the condition that future OPSC funding disbursements would be conditioned on repayment of the 2016 COP or ITEC replacement. In other words, they're not going to send you any more money unless it's used for one of two purposes: paying off that 2016 COP or building that ITEC project, which was an approved project by the state as part of phase 3. Fast forward to September of 2019, we just issued those GEO bonds and paid down $3.2 million of the outstanding 2016 COPs, exactly as listed in the plan of finance. Totally knowing that the project costs were in excess of potential available resources, the board at that time instructed that we halt ITEC progress until such time as sufficient resources could be identified to complete the project. And then the other plans of the finance, other parts of the plans of finance really just were not viable. Some of them involved negotiating with bond owners to see if we could swap some of the previous uses and recapture some funds to pay off some 2015 COPs that we had repaid. Too many bond owners there. We couldn't convince enough of them to join, and really have to have a unanimous decision by all the owners of the debt to pull that type of stuff off. And here we were at the end of 2019 on the front end of the COVID reality. And so ITEC replacement remained on hold. We continued to chat with OPSC and try to figure out other pathways to achieve the two goals that were stated, which are repaying the 2016 COPs and identifying sufficient resources to complete the ITEC building. But those conversations, as with everything in our world, became very slow during 2019 tail end and into 2020. As in all honesty, folks just weren't in offices in Sacramento. It takes a couple of weeks to get back and forth, et cetera. So what you're seeing here on this slide is the 2016 COPs after our initial repayment. Remember I said we issued $3.2 million in GEO bonds, applied them to the COP. The block on the left shows you the original COP. The block on the right shows you what it looks like after repayment. After repayment, the total was just over $7 million, but that includes two payments that were made originally in the amount of about $75,000. And so realistically, it's more like 6.9 that remains outstanding. You'll see what we did was we basically paid principal off from 2021 through about 2037. The idea being at that time to minimize the amount of additional encroachment to the general fund in the near term. Try to reduce your payments in the near term as much as possible. and so to speak, give us some more time before everything came to fruition. In the last 18 months or so, and really since late 2019, we've had some new developments. Some of them are very obvious. We have a permanent administrator in the seat at this point in time, which is a great thing to have and really helps this process come moving forward a little bit faster. But the district staff and his team continue working on developing options. And in the interceding period, for better or worse with COVID, there have been a lot of state and federal stimulus programs that provide additional resources that really can mitigate some of your operational costs since the onset of the pandemic. And really, you've reflected that in your current LCAP and budget approvals, as I understand it. You've set aside some money in your budget, as well as directed in your LCAP that repayment of debt. These 2016 COPs is an important piece, kind of your fiscal and operational future going forward. The district was also successful in obtaining a career technical education facilities program grant. It's a grant that the district had put in for a number of times before and not been successful, but that provides some additional resources for the potential reconstruction or replacement of the ITech building. Then, as a result of some economic uncertainty, we're actually in a place in time where we're really near all-time lows for borrowing rates. So if we're going to do any financing, any adjustments of financing, et cetera, there's probably no better time in history than now to do those. The district has also retained a new architect. We're working on revised ITech plans with the idea that the plans will be designed to match the available resources. It won't be the same 12,000 square foot building that was originally drawn up. It'll probably be something of a smaller footprint. But that being said, it will be something that will be achievable and attainable with the resources that we believe will be available. So those are all kind of positives. I think on the negative side, we do know that due to some supply chain disruptions, construction material costs have increased substantially. And let's be honest about it, out in your part of the world, the cost of construction is not getting cheaper anytime soon. To the extent it's gone up in the urban and suburban areas, it's gone up that much more for you guys. It's just that many fewer folks who are willing to come out this far to do that kind of work. Scarcity of resources just means they have to be trucked in from further away than normal, et cetera. Nothing is helping us on the project cost side of things, so to speak. But in light of these mostly positive developments, the district and its team have prepared a revised plan of finance, which we hope will minimize the fiscal impacts of potential rebates or returns of those funds to the school facility program, as well as deliver a functional but scaled back ITech replacement. I think those are all positive things. I think that, we're starting to look toward answering those two questions, paying off the 2016 COP and replacing the ITech. So let's talk about this updated plan of finance. As we noted, there's some new resources in the mix. There are also some downscaled costs on obligations. Let's start with the resources. And I just like this graphical version. It's a little easier to work with. You have the CTE Facilities Program grant that provides about $3 million for construction of the ITech building. That grant has a match requirement. That match requirement requires the district to produce an equivalent amount of $3 million of matching funds. Unfortunately, you cannot double dip. You can't use hardship money as match for a grant or vice versa. So we have to find a new source of $3 million if we want to obtain that grant. But in all honesty, if we want to have the ITech building completed, the facilities grant has a limited window of its existence. We've applied in the past. We've been successful this time in getting it, whereas we weren't in the past. It is by far and away the biggest chunk of money that's available for that ITech replacement. And the $3 million plus the matching funds get you somewhere between $6.5 million in total to start the ITech reconstruction process. Also on the ITech building side, you have the original school facility program hardship award, which would be $2.5 million that provides additional funding. Putting that all in the mix, give you somewhere between $8.5 and $9 million to potentially look at building an ITech building. You can't use this hardship money for anything other than the purpose of rebuilding ITech. It wouldn't flow to you to repay the COP otherwise. It's conditioned on completion of the ITEC project. But if you want to claim any of that money, the ITEC building is how it would be claimed and what it would be used for. Similar for the grant, we have to deliver the project to receive the grant. We have to deliver matching funds to receive the grant and deliver the project. These are all construction streams. They don't really serve the financial side of things. We could wash our hands of them all, say we don't want any of them, but we don't get an ITEC building at the end of the day if that is the option we choose to go. On the flip side, we also have some hardship appeal awards. District is actually owed about $1.2 million by the state. Ever since the material inaccuracy discussions, the state has basically said, we're not going to send you any money unless it's used for repayment of the COP for building the ITEC. Specifically to these appeals, because they are prior hardship awards, which they would view as being money that was advanced by the 2016 COP, that $1.2 million will only come to the district if it promises to apply it to the 2016 certificate of participation repayment. It's the only thing that they will send it out for. It's the only option we have with it. But in all honesty, receiving it and reducing the 2-to-1 kind of loss on whatever remains on the COP probably makes sense at the end of the day. We also have that funding flexibility in the general fund, which really is born from the ESSERS 1 and 2 stimulus programs. The district is exploring the ESSER 3 funding as well. There might be some additional funding flexibility borne by that, but the ESSERS 1 and 2 are believed to create in total between the general fund and the food services fund about $2.6 million in additional resources. Now that's taking some expenses that you would otherwise have used your reserves for and using these funds in lieu of that, which frees that money up. It'd be nice to keep those as reserves. But again, for every one of those dollars that we don't apply to the 2016 COP, you will owe the state back that dollar, and eventually you will pay that 2016 COP off as well. So in our minds, if you've got additional resources that you can apply toward 2016 COP repayment, it probably saves the district more from the bottom line standpoint in the long run. Down on the bottom is our obligations. These are kind of the known knowns. You have to produce a match of about $3.5 million. We'll talk about that in more detail here momentarily. You have to pay off the 2016 COP, ideally sooner rather than later, so that when we do the audits of the projects, there's not as much of that remaining outstanding, minimizing the amount of dollars the state may claim back. You've got an ITEC to build. We're using a ballpark number of $9 million as kind of the budget. That's a number that's been moving to the left and to the right as we talk about it. But for talking purposes, let's just use the estimate of the resources we have available. Punchline on the ITEC is if you pursue it, it will have to be built to budget. You may not get everything you want, and we'll talk about some strategies for how to get as much as we can out of that. But at the end of the day, if you want an ITEC building, there is a cost that will be associated with it. And some of these sources of funds will fill in some of that. But once you're out of funds, we can't continue to spend the money as we had in the past. We can't use cash flow money for the purpose of doing more projects. You have to repay the cash flow balances. Otherwise, it's just more 2-to-1 dollars that you're losing, having to owe money back to the state. And then finally, I don't want this to be forgotten, and your county office makes it very clear to me every time we talk about this, but as part of filling in those gaps, that $14 million in phases 1 and 2 and 3 of your projects, the general fund has provided quite a bit of support to those projects. There's actually an interfund loan in the amount of, I keep using 3.2, but I talked with Corey today. He thinks it's more closer to 3, maybe a little less than $3 million. So right now, the general fund has loaned $3 million to fund 35, I believe it is. That money is due back to the general fund at some point, and you should collect that money back to the general fund. The county office is very preferable to you doing that. So that's one more layer. The difference with the 3.5 that you owe yourself is it's $1 for every dollar you owe yourself. For every dollar that remains outstanding on the COP, it's $1 you owe to the COP plus $1 back to the state. So while I want the general fund to get all of its money back, I'm going to put a higher priority at this point in time on repaying the 2016 COP to avoid that prospect of money being taken back by the state. Let's talk about the 2016 COP repayment and what we believe we can do right now. With ongoing payments and everything that was done through 2019, there's $6.98 million of 2016 COP balance outstanding. They only look at the principal amount of your COP outstanding for what they would claim back from you. The district is owed $1.2 million in appeals. OPSC will give you that money to repay the 2016 COP. There's $2.6 million in flexibility in your general fund and cafeteria funds by virtue of ESSER funding, ESSER 1 and 2 that is. That would in theory go to repaying the 2016 COP. In combination, those two sources provide about $3.8 million and would bring our 2016 COP balance down from 6.9 to roughly 3.2. With 3.2 million, if we didn't do a thing after that, that's the most the state in theory would come back and tell you that you owe back. We're hoping we can get a little bit further with things like what we find in ESSER 3. We're also hoping that we can identify some additional funding sources, such as potential changes to federal impact aid and other resources in this environment, which may add to the mix. We are eagerly awaiting the infrastructure bill language to kind of see if there are any opportunities in there to potentially seek new grants or other funding sources to help pay some of this prior 2016 COP debt off. We've got a few concepts as to other things that could be done, but keep in mind at some point in time, the state will say the projects are done, we conduct our audits. What remains outstanding in that 2016 COP when they conduct those audits is what they will ask the district to send back. Is that clear for everyone? Excellent. Once we have completed the updated plan of finance, we believe that the state will kind of do all of its audits. And at that point in time, again, it's $2 for every $1 that remains outstanding. Quick math, because I like tables full of numbers. This is the 6.98 less the 2.6 less the 1.2, leaves you with a technical balance of $3,176,548 that potentially could be claimed back. Other resources under development, potential ESSERS 3, potential impact, and potential other sources that are a myriad of potential federal grant programs or other things that may create additional funding flexibility. Long story short, we have a way to get this down to 3.2. I suggest we pursue that. If we pursue nothing else, in the long run, it's in our best interest to reduce and mitigate that amount of debt that is remaining on the 2016 COP, because quite frankly, the district will have to either write a check or finance what it owes back to the state. A bit of good news, I guess, on the state side of clawing back money is it used to be you had to pay them what you owe within a 5-year window. If you use their financing mechanism, there's a longer window now of up to 20 years. But I've got some other ideas as to how we could approach that will sunshine here in a moment. Let's keep talking about the two questions. The second piece of that question being the ITech replacement. Right now, the district has a commitment for $3 million in CTE-FP grant funding. The CTE-FP grant funding, again, requires a local match. I believe it's dollar for dollar, $3 million that you would have to provide in local match. Right now, you have about $2.6 million in additional hardship funding through the OPSC hardship program for ITech replacement. That is an approved project. The approvals are tabled right now while we update plans, but it is an approved project. We have assurances from the Office of Public School Construction that once we have approved plans, you will go back to your place in line. You will have that 2.6 available. It may even be a little bit more than 2.6 as the grant amounts will grow year over year for inflation. And when you get funded, it will be in a year or two after was originally intended. But that $2.6 million is the state share. And I won't get into all the details of the ITech because there was a fire, there's some insurance proceeds, there's a lot of things that muddy the waters and how you account for those dollars. But $2.6 million was designed for a 12,000 square foot building. We're not talking about a 12,000 square foot building at this point in time. We're talking about maybe 6,000 to 8,000. That amount of 2.6 will probably be scaled back pro rata based upon the number of square feet that you end up building. There's some decisions to be made there, but in all honesty, the hardship money has proven that it's not sufficient to complete projects. To the extent that we get whatever square footage we get, let's get as much of that money as we can for that square footage. But let's not stretch or do anything foolish to try to get the full 2.6, because in all honesty, 2.6 builds you nowhere near 12,000 square feet. 2.6 gets you more like 2,500 square feet of space built. And that's not talking about fully equipping it or everything like that. That's just kind of space built. So while the 2.6 is a nice number to know is out there and it sets our upper threshold, at the end of the day, we'll probably end up getting less than that amount. But again, no harm, no foul. It's really just additional contribution to the project, plus the grant money and other funding sources that will be developed. If we had it all in the hopper and we could claim the full 2.6, it gets us to about 8.6 million for ITEC replacement. Current cost estimates indicate we were nowhere near a 12,000 square foot building at $8.6 million. That would be something more on the order of $12 to $14 million, maybe a hair more today. And so we weren't going to get to the full 12,000 square feet. But 8.6, 8 million, if we scale back, maybe even 7 and change, gets us a long way toward where we may want to be with the identified funding sources using a smaller footprint. We've talked about with the architect, looking at what the footprint is, how the space is laid out. I have been encouraging that we try to get as much enclosed square footage as possible and perhaps focus on 1 or 2 pathways and finishing or building for 1 or 2 pathways, having square footage that can be developed later, perhaps equipped through partnerships with other entities, perhaps a community college district, local industry, things of that nature, to help expand what goes into that ITEC after the fact. But in terms of the hard construction, I'm hoping that you can get to somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 square feet, maybe a hair over that, but we're not going to get to 12. There's just no way to get there. If we try to pursue that, we'll end up with a much bigger hole than we can survive, I think. And realistically, I know we've talked about this, superintendent, but we're looking at, potentially talking to folks like College of the Redwoods and others to see if there might be an interest in partnering and helping to maybe do some of the things that the grant and other stuff wouldn't do, such as, and we'll get into details on the grant in a second, but perhaps provide equipment. Perhaps provide additional things that go into the building after the fact. That we can say the project is complete. Now we're getting contributions and donations from external parties to finish off and make this space what we really want it to be. Reality is that once you start construction on this square footage, it's probably the last kind of capital project building project that you're going to be doing for a number of years. So it's kind of the last bite of the apple. Which is why, while I do believe it will be a smaller footprint, I'm encouraging perhaps more space to be finished in the future versus having a totally finished, even smaller footprint that allows you some time to grow resources, look for additional opportunities. I do believe as we come out of the pandemic, some of the stimulus programs will allow some opportunities to potentially create some opportunities with the community college district or other entities where they can see the benefit in providing a donation of things to help make that space that we have available more usable for our CTE projects in the future, though it might not be totally what we want to see when it's finally completed from the first phases of construction. We can fill it in with stuff that will make it what we want it to be over time. Does that make sense to everyone? And just so you know, there's a very great thing about this CTEFP grant. It gives our ITEC project 2 identities. There is a hardship identity, which we know what the rules are. We know that there's potentially money owed back. We know there's only 2.4 million there. It also has a grant, a facilities program, a career technical education facilities program grant tag with it as well. And those 2 things are separate. So CTEFP grant funding does not turn into negated hardship. CTEF matching funds do not count against your hardship. If your CTEFP grant project costs a little bit more then the resources that the CTEFP grant provides you, unlike hardship, you can go ahead and finish that project with your own resources and it shouldn't count against you. We've talked with OPSC about that. They concur. So as long as we have this CTEFP grant available and kind of are doing parts of the project under that umbrella, we have a little more flexibility on that side of things. If it was a pure hardship program and it came in above the cost that were estimated, you run a risk of those funds being seen as available contribution and the state saying, no, 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 you couldn't use that, you owe us money back. Yes, Lori.
Yeah, with the grant that we received, I understood there was a deadline that we had to start using it for.
There are certain deadlines for its use. Those deadlines are months away. The team is aware of that, as I understand, and we're working toward those deadlines. We also have to get our project plans reapproved because in the year that's gone by, the technical approvals have lapsed. That's something that's underway. In fact, there is a conference call with DSA this Thursday to move that process along. So behind the scenes, we are moving along the pathway to allow us to be in position for that grant if the board so directs. I'm not presupposing anything here. If the board says, nope, pull the plug on all this, totally understand, fine. But I do think it's probably the best opportunity we're going to have in the foreseeable future to get to the end of this road. And I think it's, probably, for lack of a better description, some are calling it the light at the end of the tunnel. It's probably the light at the end of the tunnel that's not a train getting ready to run us over and claim a bunch of money back. So yes, there are deadlines, there are requirements, and we'll talk a little bit more about the grant here in a moment. In fact, let's just do that right now. The grant was not designed for 12,000 square feet. It was actually designed for about 1/3 of that original planned facility. When the grant was put in, the grant was identified as mainly being focused on the woodwork pathway or wood shop pathway. We're also going to be working to see how much flexibility we have with other pathways, but we may have to use that grant funding for the narrow focus of the woodworking stuff and the spaces that serve that. Now, realistically, we may have some overlap with, how we call it, not lab space, but workshop or workspace in that building that might be used by multiple pathways at the end of the day. But for the time being, the way the grant was written, it's basically the woodwork pathway, which was identified as 1/3 of the building. It was basically circling 1/3 of the building, putting it next to the other 2/3 and saying, this is the piece that this grant is focused on. So there's some back and forth we have to have about refining and fine tuning how we're going to use that grant, what we can do with it, but that grant should be enough to focus on about 4,000 to 5,000 square feet of the building. Does that make sense? Any more questions on that? Very good, very good. So we've identified some funding sources, smaller footprint. Let's see here. We've talked about partnering with outside entities as a potential way to expand what that overall building looks like. And given the district's limited reserves, we would recommend that instead of you using $3 million to provide that match for the grant, you finance your match, because we'd rather use that $3 million, in all honesty, to repay the 2016 COPs. $3 million for the 2016 COPs in the long run saves you $7 million and change. In the short run, we could certainly use it to provide a grant match and get our ITEC built, but then we owe back a lot more on the COP. And we've got some thoughts on how to mitigate that further, but we'll get to those here in a second. OPSC has confirmed again that these grant sources, the match, any CTE facilities project cost overruns that the district may incur will not count against your hardship money. So we've gotten that nexus broken. We've gotten a place where they see these kind of as separate things. It's not as much of a prisoner's dilemma as it was prior, but it's still one where you've got to decide which way you want to go for your own best interest and the best interest of everyone else involved. Challenges. There are certainly some challenges that remain, but in all honesty, when we started this out in 2018, we were vastly improved. We've made progress. We've paid down some COP. We've closed out projects. We now know that the fourth phase is not a reality. We have a grant that's been awarded to us. We are in an environment where there are stimulus programs, for better or worse, the reasons why we have them, but they exist now. Their stimulus programs are going to be focused on things like capital construction, building public infrastructure. They almost always are. And so this environment is fairly good, but the challenges that remain are as follows. While the balance of the 2016 COP can be significantly reduced, there's still the risk of about $3.2 million remaining outstanding, triggering the need to repay the state that amount. Every dollar we can get that down further, that becomes a lower number, but it is a reality. There is a viable pathway to getting to the ITEC, but in all honesty, the smartest way to get there, in my opinion, would be to conduct one additional financing, which gets you the matching funds. We can structure that how we want to structure it. We can stretch it out. You can pay it over time, but it's better to use $3 million in financing to produce your match versus taking $3 million of funds on hand that would otherwise go to your COP. The CTE-FP grant funding, while likely limited to the woodshop components, would likely be limited to woodshop components. That's one of our challenges. We're in the process of talking about and working through that right now. I believe we'll get a little more flexibility there. How much, I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, it could be that we are narrowly focused on a woodshop component plus some additional space to be used for other projects or other programs in CTE, such as metal shop and automotive. But I don't know that the grant could be used, let's say, to purchase a lift for the automotive side of things. We'll see how much flexibility we can get on that based on how the grant was written. But at the end of the day, that is a challenge that we're having to deal with. Future SFP funding disbursements will be aligned to a process which may not result in cash being in hand until April of 22. We were envisioning that if we construct the ITEC, it would probably be a project you're conducting over the summer of 22. Realistically, you want to bid that out in the spring, first parts of 2022. Given the history of seeking bids here, we kind of know it may take a couple of tries to get the right bidder. And so I want you to have funds in hand and everything there. SFP funding being potentially some of the grant funding, also the hardship funding, only flows when the state generally sells bonds. The state only sells bonds for this purpose twice a year. Once in the spring in March, once in the fall, usually in September. Sometimes August, usually September. It's at that point in time that they have the cash to send out. So we may have a cash flow issue as well, just like we had originally, which was the theoretical reason why the original 2016 COP was issued. We've talked with OPSC about that cash flow issue. There's some solutions. We'll highlight those here in a second. And then quite honestly, the other challenge is just that, as we talked about earlier, construction costs go up. State averages for what they reimburse tend to lag. And in your part of the world, they tend to go up faster than the other parts of the world. So this is something that you'll always be behind on, in my estimate. I don't think there'll ever be a day that we'll look up and say, hey, look, construction in Klamath Trinity Unified School District is cheaper than anywhere else in the state. The realities of the remote location, some of the sites being even further out, just add to that complexity. And the fact is, like, for instance, today, if you were doing a construction project, basically the Central Valley, the Red Bluff area and Shasta area lumber yards and stuff are all off limits to you. You can't truck any of that stuff in over that pass right now. You'd have to go all the way down and around, which means kind of now you're stuck, which maybe if what you need is there, that just adds to the deployment cost. They have to put it on a truck, drive it all the way down toward Mendocino County, then back up to 101, then out to the site. All these things add to costs. It is a challenge you'll always face on construction here. And I think anytime the district has a future construction project, it's something you should keep very much in mind and make sure that you're doing the ongoing accounting of resources versus expenditures so that the next time we have these holes, we see them up front and we pause sooner. If you ask me today, how could this have not come about? the answer would have been probably to repay the COP after phase one. Raise your hand and say we had a $1.9 million shortage. What do we do about this, state? And then you could have known kind of what the situation was and perhaps been in a position to curtail some of the expenses on phase two and not let ourselves get as far in the hole. But quite frankly, with $14 million beyond what was provided to you, you've used up all the GO bond money that you had. You used up some of your district resources in terms of your reserves. And you still have a $3 million kind of deficit that you owe the district's general fund back from Fund 35. I would suggest, in the future, if you got multiple phases, close each phase as you're going. That's for future suggestions. Doesn't have anything to do with our challenges right now. 2016 COP repayment solutions. You've got to find, if we finalize this updated plan of finance, once that's done, I believe we can immediately claim the 1.2. I believe the state is sitting on the 1.2. As soon as we tell the state we're going to use that to repay the 2016 COP in written format in this updated plan of finance, I believe they will send you that money. I believe that we have the ESSERS 1 and 2 funding available to us right now in terms of what's sitting in reserves and could apply that toward 2016 COP repayment. As we work with Humboldt County's Office of Ed and their auditors and your auditors to kind of figure out what can be done with ESSERS 3, we're hoping that we can kind of figure out a few more dollars beyond the 3.8 that we see here and get a little further down the road and use that all to make one consolidated repayment to the 2016 COP. We would then suggest that once you've made that payment, you take whatever remains of the 2016 COP and you refinance the balance. Could be up to $3 million. Why would you refinance that at this point in time? Quite frankly, interest rates are lower. And if we flip the page, you'll see how much could be saved. But one, if we have a COP that we're doing and we're doing this repayment, we have to do something of that nature anyway to raise our matching funds. So they're similar transactions. They don't require individual discrete transactions. We can actually do them together as a single transaction, a series A and B in one. Takes your issuance costs, divide them in half, right? Because we're not doing two issuances, we're just doing one. We could use it as an opportunity, and I have gotten the thumbs up from OPSC. This piece would have to be under its own special resolution and use the same state resolution. And I would be very insistent that it is only cash flow to advance those state funds we anticipate in April, or potentially if we miss the deadline, September of next year. But it makes sense to do it if we need it for cash flow to add that into this mix. It allows us to reduce interest costs because current markets are so low. One other thing it does is it technically retires the 2016 COP. We've talked with OPSC about refinancing portions of the 2016 COP before to change its title to something else. And would that make it go away? And they said no. So doing that doesn't necessarily make it go away from the OPSC rule standpoint. But OPSC isn't the only one in the state who's got rules, and there's other folks who can lean on OPSC. And if we wanted to make an effort at lobbying or talking to legislators about the situation and seeing if we can get some additional resources, perhaps make the ITEC more of what we want it to be or ameliorate some of this debt load, this 2016 COP after refinancing would technically be gone. Its indenture would be retired. You would no longer have a 2016 COP outstanding. From a political optics standpoint, we'd be able to say, if we paid off this money toward the 2016 COP through GO bonds, we use this money from our resources and reserves, we use this money, and then we took the remaining balance and refinanced it away. And so there technically is no more 2016 COP outstanding. Puts the OPSC side of things and the optics side of things in a little better position for us in terms of if a legislator were to ask, well, is any of this still outstanding? You can legitimately say no. Some of it was refinanced, some of it was paid off, but today, once we do a restructure and a refinance, the 16 would be gone. That's something that politically is probably advantageous to your position. Secondarily, or finally rather, if the other financing that we're doing, raising matching funds, et cetera, are done concurrently, all these things can be put into one single instrument. It would actually leave you at the end of the day with no 2016 COP, a single COP, a portion of which would be cash flow advancement, and we expect to repay as soon as possible with state money, an even kind of longer payment stream over time that's less lumpy, more predictable. And we would actually encourage, if we do refinance, kicking the tires on and seeing if we can roll the 15s in there as well and leave you with one debt stream. That's it. That would be the goal. So if we flip the page and look at why this, in my mind, makes some sense. Here you see on the far left, the 2016 COPs as they stand today. That's the roughly 6.9 million after the 19 and 20 payments that remain in that far left block. In that middle block, if we took the $3.2 million and applied it to COP repayments as we had in the past, taking it from the front, going to the back, it brings you down to about $3.2 million in outstanding COP. Interest-only payments for a number of years are about $115,000 per year. Without adding anything else into the mix, if we were to restructure that $3.2 million in 2016 COPs with today's rates, we could do that with about $3.1 million of a refunding COP. What does that mean? It means we only have $3.1 million of replacement COP principal outstanding. I haven't gotten acquiescence from the state on this yet, but I would make a hard argument at that point in time that your obligation is not 3.2, it's really the 3.1. That would save us a few $100,000 more. Pennies, yes, but incrementally it gets us to a better position. I would also point out that your total repayments at the end of the day would go down by $1.5 million. Why? We're shortening the term of that loan. We're paying the principal off sooner. We meet the technical requirements for refunding requirements, which are that you have to save money and you can't extend the term of the loan. This will be a shorter loan, lower interest rates, and quite frankly, cost the district less over time in interest expense. Let's talk ITech replacement solutions, and then we'll put a bow on this segment of it here fairly quickly after that. As revised ITech plans are finalized, hopefully the next month or two, we'll be able to firm up what the project cost estimates are and make sure that we can do something within the budget that we're looking at that time. We'll continue to work back and forth to revise and update both sides of that kind of equation to make sure that we're A, building the budget, and B, we know what budget we're building to. If the district acts quickly to access the next round of funding through the school facilities program and CTEFP grant, you'll have that money by April of 22. If you're delayed, it wouldn't be until September of 22. If we want to do construction projects over the summer, we probably want the money sooner rather than later. I would be preferable to you guys having the funding by the end of this year so that you can bid the projects out starting January 1. And give yourselves a few opportunities to hopefully find the ideal construction team to conduct construction over the summer of 22 and probably into the start of the 22 kind of school year. But with that being said, the matching funds for the CTEFP could be obtained at that same time, all part of that same kind of single financing. The timing of it all kind of makes sense for the end of this year in my mind. Also gives us a better shot at catching the favorable interest rate market. If we were to advance those state funds that we were talking about for the ITech, especially if other financing we conduct at the same time, we recommend kind of doing it all again as a single financing transaction. And this would allow you basically to have all of your resources and everything in hand and known by the end of 21. It also gives your administration some time as we're looking at stimulus program stuff that's going to be rolled out at roughly that same time frame to lobby and talk with other entities about potentially participating. And it's quite frankly an easier conversation to say, hey, I've got $7 million for this project. I'm going to build this much shell. Perhaps I could build this much more shell if I can get your commitment to provide the lift. If I can get your commitment to provide the tools, this, that, or the other. I think it just puts you in a better position to, as you get ready to go into the ground over the summer, on that project, make as much of it as you possibly can, and cobble together as many resources as possible.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said if the district acts quickly to access the next funding round. What is it? What do we have? What's that?
So there are certain deadlines, and those deadlines require certain things. And you put in for your school facility program funding under each funding round, and then it's sent to you once they sell those bonds. And I'm forgetting what the technical cutoff is for the March disbursement, but I want to say it's only a few months away.
I think it's December.
It's like, yeah, I think it's December. My concerns are right now is that we have to get our plans approved and back in order. We're working as fast as we can to get that done.
So that's what you're talking about, the act quickly.
Yes. And if for some reason we miss that, you still have time, not infinite time, but you have one more round that you could in theory claim that at, which would be September of 22.
Okay.
If for some reason we had a hiccup, stub toe, something happens, I like the idea of having the funds on hand, setting up cash flow to be repaid by no later than, let's say, September of 22 or maybe October, December to give us a little wiggle room. And having those monies now, knowing that we're going to go through that process and get those monies. But I have to be 100% clear about this. The portion of any financing that we do, that I would be willing to do for you, specific to cash flow, must be cash flow only. It must be defined as such. It will be a separate series. It will have a separate redemption provision. And the day that that state money comes in, it needs to go right away to paying that. We can't provide any sort of implication or indication that we're trying to play what they perceive as the games of the past. It would be cash flow advance. As soon as that SFP money comes in, it's paid off. That is to make OPSC happy, to keep our noses clean. And quite frankly, we did a lot of work to get ourselves out of the material and accuracy world. I don't want to slip anywhere near back that. At this point in time, they're being much nicer with us at the state. When we were there before, it was basically one of two arguments. Repay us now, to which we said, here are the keys to the district because there's not enough resources to repay. Or we found materially inaccurate and we're going to charge you for the money over time and you're not going to get out of this and you'll be forever, not forever, but for a number of years in trouble with the SFP, precluding any ability to even get to the ITech money or some of the other money at that point in time that was still due to the district. So best set of scenarios, I think, all things being equal, would be to hit that April. But I also know that we're in pandemic world. I know that things don't always move as fast as we want. There's some defined deadlines. I'm positive we can get it done by September of 22. That just comes after the construction window. And I'd rather see the construction start before then. I think the district's brothers would be to have it happen, or at least commence over the summer. Since matching funds will need to be obtained from the CTEFP for the CTEFP grant, you're going to be doing some form of financing no matter what. You could borrow those funds directly from the state. Where markets are right now, we can get you a better deal, just in all honesty. Secondarily, with all the other pieces going on, we can really structure something I think that is tailored to what you want versus a cookie cutter. Here's a 5 or 10 or 15 or 20-year amortization that the state wants to give you. It'll give you more flexibility. We can also write in some much better provisions for redemption, give you flexibility in the future for any potential resources that may develop 4 or 5 years down the line, gives you more relief valves to get out of that financing in the future that we could set up. I'm sorry, am I one page off? No, I'm not. We had gone to potential lease options. Let me talk about this piece here, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. So as I noted, a single COP can really provide a solution to several of the challenges. Within the proposed COP, we have defined series for each of our kind of highlighted purposes. And that could be a Series A, which advances the state sources that we're waiting for, the school facility program money. We could have a Series B that helps facilitate the repayment of the 2016 COPs. We could have a Series C, which could be your matching funds. We could have a series D. If you wanted to, you could use a little bit of your capacity to, and I say this very hesitantly, but if we saw plans for the iTech building that, let's say, were $500,000, $1 million more than what we knew were resources and really made sense, it was the right size building, it worked for your programs, you could finance that in there. In fact, you could also, if we wanted to, pre-calculate what the state may claim back from you. As long as we know that claim will come in 3 years, which we know it will, which is your deadline to spend bond funds, I believe we can finance that through that COP as well at this time, have those monies sitting there ready to pay the state when they say pay us back. So it wouldn't be the difficulty of where do we get this money from? We could already finance it ourselves in one of the lowest interest rate environments ever. I think mathematically it starts to look a lot better doing it that way. We haven't settled on what these various components will be in totality yet, but I'm simply saying that this one financing could be put together to solve all of those challenges through a single instrument. I think it's a more elegant way to go than separate financings here, each one incurring its own separate issuance related costs, each one having its own separate repayment schedule. Saves your staff a lot of work, would put us in a place where once we're done, kind of in the December, in my mind, January timeframe, this stuff is locked up, put to bed. We know what it's going to look like for the future. There's no more ambiguity, no more questions. All the above potential uses we've talked about with OPSC, we've gotten their tentative, it's okay to do these things. So we're not running afoul of any of their rules by doing any of this stuff. We've kind of talked about what the procedure would need to be for each piece. And it would put us in a position that would not negate any remaining hardship funding, which isn't going to be the everything, but it's part of the drops in the bucket that get us help. I'm going to show you a schedule here for what a extended term $9 million COP looks like. You'll see the bottom line is $8.5 million. There's some premium generation. The project money or the money that you can use that this generates is closer to $9 million. And I show you this only because in my mind, at the end of the day, at most, this is probably where we land at with outstanding debt, all things being equal. And we'll get back to that here in a second, but you'll see why as we run through these additional options. Beyond the identified solutions, there are a few other potential pathways to consider and repayment of the general fund to address. These are your forward-looking challenges. We would encourage the district to continue to pursue grant funding, any additional contribution from agencies for the iTech replacement, whether it's a community college district, Better Business, whatever you have locally that might be interested in participating. We would encourage you to explore, I'm not so sure you could get there, but look at general obligation bond program, perhaps one more in the future. That could provide a great relief valve and perhaps provide some of the money needed in the future to enhance the iTech building to what you want it to be. To the extent the revised iTech vision can be achieved using the funds that are beyond what we've talked about here previously, it will increase the district's flexibility to address general fund repayment. What do I mean by that? Essentially, when you're doing this grant program, you're providing a $3 million match, and that match is going to be, you know, what goes into the building. If you can get some additional resources beyond that, some of that match can be from those additional resources. You can then take some of your ESSER's flexibility back to your general fund. That general fund money then becomes yours to do with what you would have normally done anyway. So it's one of those things where we can get the building, if we can find enough participants to contribute over time, perhaps we can use some of that money that we contributed to the building for matching funds and bring it back to repatriate for other purposes. I would suggest that it go first and foremost towards rebuilding your fund balances and paying off the money that's owed to the general fund from Fund 35. I think those are the next most sensible priorities in my mind. That being said, those are the next priorities. Your first priority should probably be 2016 COP repayment. And to the extent we can get ourselves as much of that repayment taken care of. In all honesty, I think once this iTech building is done, as far as I can tell, you're probably done with the school facility program for a number of years. I don't think there's a lot more left to do that I'm aware of in terms of modernization projects. If I'm wrong on that, do let me know. But
we do have a wing at Trinity Valley and one wing at the high school that are still 1956 models.
Okay. So there may be an opportunity to re-engage. What I would say then is that if we could put a period on this, in the future, it probably would not be a hardship program. You'll probably engage in that using normal modernization. Just knowing the realities of the complexities of hardship, unless the state finds a great solution for cost overruns in remote parts of California, it puts districts in this position. You're not the only ones who have run into these kind of issues with this program. But if you do engage in the future, I think it will be under the standard program. All the more reason to avoid material inaccuracies and keep ourselves in good stead. But what I would really love to see happen, in all honesty, for your administration, I know your current superintendent. I've known your previous interim. I knew the guy who was selected, but never actually got all the way up here. And I knew the guy before that. And this is taking up a lot of their bandwidth and time. I would really love to see Jennifer and Carmi get a year or two to focus on just the district operations without having to deal with the headaches of OPSC rules, trips to Sacramento to talk with state officials, and I don't know how many dozens of hours of conference calls to try to figure out solutions to the problem that's been set upon you. Perhaps we can talk about how you get home on those other wings once we get this figured out. That would just, in my mind, give everyone a pause, a chance to breathe, reevaluate, enjoy hopefully a functional iTech building, and then look at what comes next. But that being said, those two, given what's been done and the fact that the district has raised over $85 million in state funding, really leveraging about $8 million of local kind of resources, is pretty darn amazing. It's not something that, well, giving us headaches, it's a pretty awesome feat as well. And at this point in time, I believe the majority of your classrooms are modernized. They're functional. They're in good stead for the foreseeable future. We've got a window of time to figure out how to deal with the next round of modernization. And hopefully we'll figure out a better way if and when that day comes. So when I add all these different pieces up at the end of the day, and let's just flip here, I throw the 2015 COP on this, but if you take that out, it gets us back down to that kind of round $9 million number. I only put it in this one because I believe that if we're going to restructure the 16s, let's look at restructuring the 15s and see if we can increase the savings for the district general fund over time across the board. We have to finance the $3 million match for that CTEFP grant. The restructured COP would be about $3 million. Other purposes, a round number, you can move the line, whether that's for enhancements to the iTech or whether that is for finding additional resources that may not necessarily go toward iTech, but perhaps pay for that rebate that the state may claim once we figure out how small we can make that 2016 COP. You're going to end up with roughly about $9 million worth of debt outstanding in my estimate. Now, there are ways we can repay pieces of that more rapidly. There's ways that if we pass a general obligation bond, we can perhaps defray some of that cost to a future date, et cetera. But that is just a reality. If you want to get home on everything, it's where we'll land. Quite frankly, if we do nothing, we'll have roughly $6 million of COP and a $3 million match that you won't have to produce, so that'll take that off the table, but you'll have no iTech. You're going to carry some debt as a result of this either way. I'd love to see it recycled and kind of not recycled, but restructured and put into something that we talk about how your future budgets will look, how your MYPs will look, and it's designed to fit those. Maybe it's a little more backloaded, maybe it's a little more front loaded. We'll see what we can do. But the idea would be to deliver something that puts this all into one basket, locks it away, and lets you guys move on to other things. Summary real quick. So despite the difficulties, you've been successful in modernizing and rehabbing the majority of the facilities. $85 million in state funding has been obtained by this district. For a district of your size, that's a really amazing number. It's really good work. I know there's been a lot of headaches and pain that's come with the projects and kind of working through the program, but it is a decent amount of money that got a lot of stuff done. There are viable pathways for you to exit the hardship program and put an end on the conversations with Sacramento, at least for the time being. There's a pathway to reduce the COP balance to, in all honesty, 3 million probably, but probably closer to 2.8 when we look at ESSER 3 and other sources. And that saved you over $4 million the state would claim back. There's a window of opportunity to complete the replacement of the iTech facility with this grant and enhance the project funding in the current environment. What do I mean by that? Stimulus program dollars. There's got to be something in there that we can use or leverage, or we'll create another grant that may help us out. We need to keep our eyes on that as that language gets kind of put out to the public. And then if and when we do any of these financings, we will try to preserve all the flexibility in the world. We'll try to keep your redemption provisions as liberal as possible. So any source of funds that comes in, hopefully you can throw at that and mitigate your debt obligations as you're going forward and get yourself into a better fiscal position. And then finally, if we work judiciously and diligently, I'm not going to say it will start the 22-23 school year, but we can have an iTech building during the 22-23 school year and really start commencing those programs again. Very quickly, we're on the last couple of pages of this. Sample timeline, present information options to you guys. That's what we're kind of doing tonight. It's an informational presentation. If you so direct us, I will convene the financing team and start working on tying together all the details of all these different pieces we've talked about. I would propose in September that we come back to you and present some concrete options on the COP financing. By that time, I hope we'll have some semblance of plans. We'll have a little more information from OPSC, a little bit of fine tuning to kind of say, here's what these various series could look like. With any lease financing, any non-voter approved financing, such as a COP, there's an Education Code 17150 process that has to be conducted. That process requires that we provide notice to the county office and county about what we're going to do and gives them 30 days to respond to us. I've talked with Corey at the county office about this already. He doesn't need the full 30 days, but the legal process is 30 days. In case your county assessor, auditor, controller have something they want to say, perhaps they'll want the 30 days. According to Corey, they probably will not. But it's all the reason why you won't be taking action on documents for any financings related to this in September. We can instead conduct rating agency activities, get your rating updated so that when we come back in October, after presenting some specifics to you in September, giving you some time to think about it, we can then approve documents after that 17-150 30-day window for approval of documents. And then that kind of gets us in a position where we can approach the markets and hopefully in November, set interest rates with the idea of closing this and applying funds to repay and restructure that COP toward the end of this calendar year. That would be kind of the ideal best case scenario. I think we can achieve it. I honestly think we can get it done by November, but if we need the wiggle room, December in my mind works. Why am I eager to do that sooner than later? Quite frankly, the minute that we know that the pandemic is behind us, interest rates will start to move up. Right now, we're in a world of great uncertainty about our future. With the uncertainty in that future, people are hesitant to invest long term. They want security. That security is driving people toward municipal government-issued bonds as a secure repayment source. Once people start thinking, oh, okay, I think Ford's going to make money in the future, Boeing might be back again, the money's going to come off the table from that and go to those investment types. The reason why we have such low interest rates right now is not a function of anything other than huge demand with a limited supply. As we get through the infrastructure stuff, the states will start to issue more bonds, the supply of bonds will start to go up. That supply-demand dynamic that's allowing us these very low rates will eventually turn off. When I say low, it's not like low like we were low 2 years ago. It's low as we've pretty much seen in history. So it's a good time if we're going to lock this stuff in to do it at the cheapest rate possible. That really talks about the next steps, which I think are outlined in that timeline, but we have several matters to settle with the state. First and foremost, we kind of talked about the pieces that are in the plan of finance as updated. I can send Jennifer a copy for you guys to take a look at. I would love for us to be able to give that plan of finance to the state to get the ball rolling on their side to get the $1.2 million cleared up. While we're dealing with those matters with the state, we're going to work on updating the ITEC plans. There's a call this Thursday to achieve some of that with the Department of State architect. And then the district can determine kind of what steps it wants to take to repay the 2016 COPs. I would encourage doing as much as we can to repay as much of that as possible. The lower that number comes out at the end of the day, the better off we are. The closer we get to zero, the more I'm confident we can, if we have a very small balance, do some gamesmanship with the state to say, hey, you know, do you really need $500,000 back in the grand scheme of things? What if we looked at this, and that, and gave you credit for this? I think we can get ourselves to a pretty close to zero answer at the end of the day. That would be my ideal goal. You could then recommend and instruct, we would recommend instructing the district team, meaning the board, to instruct us to provide additional information and some financing projections for your September board meeting, give you more details at that point in time, with the intent of approving documents in October, as we have just discussed. Realistically, normally a financing takes you 3 to 4 months, but keep in mind anything we do has to go through OPSC. We don't step 1 inch in any direction unless I check with OPSC first. Do not want to stub our toes with them again. Do not want to run afoul of them. Finally, if directed by the board to proceed, we are not committed to any debt issuance until such time as we sell that debt. So this would all just get the team moving toward an eventual sale of debt, but we could pull the plug at any time if new facts come up. I think that's everything I have on this topic. What I'd love to do is discussion on this topic at this point in time. Then I have one more financing transaction I would like to bring for your consideration on the general obligation bond side of things. Very straightforward. I will not take a lot of time on it. A general obligation bond refinancing, similar to what you did in 2017. There's some meaningful savings that might be available to your taxpayers. It doesn't help the mix of what we're doing on the facility side, but may give us an opportunity to spread some issuance costs away from the COP if we're doing these at roughly the same time. But let's talk the financing and conversation on the ITEC piece first.
So you're looking for a nod from us to convene the finance team and go with your proposal.
That's what I would say. And I think the things that I would really like to hear are, one, what we've heard in terms of presenting it as a plan of finance to the state, which we talked with them about, but have not sent them the formal write-up of yet, is acceptable, in which case we could finalize that plan of finance and get it out to them, kicking off a handful of next ministerial steps with the state, including getting you the $1.2 million you've been owed for some time now. Two, it would allow us to call the attorneys, call the other participants in these financing and say, hey, we're going to move forward on some stuff, begin talking details and getting documents ready so that we can have stuff in order for you guys for October.
No, speaking for myself here, I commend you in coming up with a plan.
It was not an easy.
That is, I mean,
it was not easy. And I have to be honest with you. A big piece of my plan is not like some master brain thought of mine. It's just the reality that we knew we were in COVID. We knew there would be stimulus. We knew that if we gave ourselves a long enough window, additional opportunities would present themselves. The grant will become a reality. Additional funding will become a reality. And that's helping us find answers. Time is our friend on this one in some respects.
And in some of those, no, the deadlines. So I can see
the thought, the work, the effort, the time that's been put into this. And I'm glad that you've been able to identify a path for us. So I personally am in agreement.
I am too. I'm way more hopeful. The last time you met, I was like, this is really bad, but it doesn't sound.
It is. The last time we talked about this, we weren't sure what ESSERS could do. We hadn't had additional conversations with the state about how we could use the CTEFP grant. We didn't have an architect at the table at that point in time. There were just so many loose threads that we had to get some of the answers to before I felt comfortable putting something in front of you. And I wanted to put something in front of you that was well thought out and comprehensive. And with the time I've spent with you guys, I have a pretty good understanding. I hope this meets a lot of the goals. I know it's not the perfect plan. I wish I had the perfect plan, but I also know that, you know, we're limited on resources and we have to take the ingredients we have to cook a meal. I think this is a edible meal at the end of the day.
Oh.
It appears to me that an important part of the plan is the concession that we will build a smaller high-tech building than before, and that we will focus on wood.
I would say that the primary focus will be wood. I would tell you that, and this is why I don't want to solidify all these pieces tonight, is that when we come back and have a conversation in September, I think we'll have more answers as to how far we can go. But for right now, I would say that we know that the wood shop component or the woodworking component of the iTech building has resources. We believe there are additional resources that can be used for other parts, but it will not be as robust. So it will be a smaller iTech building, but under no stretch of the imagination is anyone conceding or saying that we won't be doing metal or auto. That's every time I'm on the phone, I've always insisted that, you know, look, it has to address all those pathways. It just may be that we start with wood and have to scale up some of the other ones over time.
I support that strategy. I think that we would love to have everything we wish to have at one time, but if we have to scale back to get it, I think I support that, and I do support an initial focus on wood. We do live in the woods. That would be a good focus.
Excellent. I believe I have the direction that I need.
I'm seeing a consensus.
I will start the team up. This will allow us to refine this. When we next talk about these components, I think what it will mostly be is details on what that financing will look like and what our next steps will be with respect to interacting with the state and other entities to secure the funds that we're supposed to be getting. As we iterate through this, we'll be refining things and getting ourselves kind of pinpoint with a goal of, and I will state this to the team, that, you know, we will find a solution by the end of the calendar year. We have, and we were fortuitous again, we had made commitments to OPSC in the past of certain dates by which we would get everything figured out. We may have escaped one of those dates because of the pandemic, for better or worse, but we only get so many of those. At a certain point in time, we do have to put a bow on this. And quite frankly, some of the things like the plan's useful life and other things are coming to the end of their kind of range to where this is our opportunity. If we don't get it done in the next 6 to 9 months, then it's well off into the future in my mind. So if I may, very quickly, I promise I will keep this as short as I can.
Martha, did you have any questions before we move into?
No, I actually, I really like this. I like that plan. I like paying down the COP, especially. I feel like that's super important, and that's going to save us some money too. I mean, we won't just be paying it down, but then we're going to be saving ourselves money in the interest. Because gosh, I think the next year's interest is over $500,000. So
Yeah,
I just feel like that's just throwing money out.
There'll be
and
some.
Oh, go ahead.
There'll be some that we have to incur in the near term for cash flow purposes and other things, but our goal at the end of the day is to get this principal amount as low as possible and your cost of carry as low as possible. We understand that we're going to be setting this up. It'll be a longer term repayment. We want some relief valves, but we are sensitive, and if we can save some dollars over the long haul, we think you can make good use of it in the future.
Any other questions, Martha?
And then, pardon me?
Any other questions or comments?
No.
With your edification, again, this is the last thing I'll get out of your hair. I'm tired of hearing me. And maybe once I'm out of this corner, I can turn the AC back on. I'm getting ready to melt. There's a presentation, it's in your packets. This is on general obligation bond refunding. This is nothing new to the district. You've done this at least once in the past. In 2017, you did a general obligation bond refinancing. Your general obligation bonds are bonds of the district that your taxpayers pay. It doesn't come out of your general fund. It doesn't come out of your other stuff. You have two authorizations, a 2008 and a 16. All these went into these facility projects. 2008 is Measure H, 2016 is Measure D. In Trinity County, one of those measures has a different letter to it. I can't remember which one though. There's some background on the bonds here. Back in 2019, we issued the remaining balance of your bonds, about $3.2 million, to deal with the COPs we talked about. Just before that, in 2017, the district issued some refinancing bonds to refund the first series of the 2008 Measure H, saved your taxpayers about $300,000 in total. At this time, the second issuance of Measure H could be refunded. It would be refunded on an advanced basis, meaning that we're doing it a little bit before the call date by a few years, but with interest rates where they are, we have to use taxable bonds under certain rules, but we can produce about $400,000 worth of savings. That's a very conservative estimate. I had some number runs that show higher. Here's my problem with refundings when I talk with boards about them. I tell you what it is to the dollar today, and the market erodes by a little bit, and I come back with a smaller number, you'll have diminished expectations. And so you'll be upset that you didn't get the whole, let's say I said 800,000. You'd be mad if I told you, now it's 750. I thought it was 800. Well, the market's got away from us a little bit. 750 would still be a good deal, but you wouldn't feel as good about it. I would say at a minimum, we can save 400. If 400,000 in savings is good enough on the refinancing of that one series, we'd ask that you nod your head and say, okay, we're okay with you proceeding with that. It has a whole process to it, and we'll get into the timeline here in a second, but just kind of the overall overarching thoughts are, think about this as if $400,000 in savings is good for you, and it's good enough, and if you're happy with that level of savings on a GO refinancing of this size, which is very comparable to what was done in 2017, actually a little better. Let us present some more details to you at the next meeting. I won't get into all these details. There's some history here on tax rates and stuff of that nature. Here's a graphical representation of your 2008 election. That green area there is that Series A that remains, that was refinanced, but some of it is not eligible to ever be refinanced, so it still remains outstanding. That's that little piece in the front. The orange piece that you see there is the piece that we would propose refinancing, which, as you can see, is the vast majority of your outstanding bonds in terms of their repayment. The nice thing about the refinancing of your 2015 Bs is they're actually issued as capital appreciation bonds, which means they compound interest, and so they cost a little bit more, which is why the savings are a little bit higher than the previous series that we refinanced. It's just more efficient when we take compounding bonds and turn them into current interest bonds, which is what we do through a refunding. The gray is your 2017 refunding. That's the tail end of that original Series A. And then that blue piece is what we wrapped everything around to get the last few dollars we could out of that program to help pay off the 2016 COP in 2019. I'm going to skip the fundamentals, but each one of these measures that you have were approved and they have a $60 tax rate estimate per. You've been a little above that in some years, a little below that in other years. Any savings on a refunding go to reduce the tax obligation over time. They don't go into anything else. We can't use them for project purposes or anything of that nature. It's no longer legal. 15, 20 years ago, you might have been able to get away with that. Today, we can't.
I asked.
You did ask. You're not the only one to ever ask that question either. It always comes up. But long story short, we can do this, produce some savings, certainly for Measure H. It would pass through to your taxpayers. Any costs associated with refinancing the bonds are included in that savings number. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to save you $400, but we're going to keep $200. That is the net impact to your tax base would be $400 after all the costs. We never hide the costs by excluding them from the savings estimate. Here's your 2016 measure. There were only 2 series there. The Series B was the second piece to be issued for COP repayment. The Series A is actually on the bubble as well and could produce some savings in addition. Let us come back with potentially some documents to approve proceeding with this and some more details. But safe to say that we've got some savings that can be produced by refinancing the bonds. It will not in any way, shape, or form increase tax rates. It will not in any way, shape, or form extend the length of the debt. If anything, it will shorten the length of the debt and lower the tax rates with definitively it will lower tax rates for your voters. Fiduciarily, it's the right thing to do. And when I come back, I've got a little matrix. It's in here. I won't talk about it in detail, but I look at what you could save over time if the rates never change, if the rates go up by 1% and whatnot. And these make a lot of sense to me to get done now because there's decent savings. It's more than half of what you would get if rates go up by 1%. In all honesty, our historical averages are more than 1% from where we are today. If we were to wait 4 years and we went back to historical averages, I'm not sure that refunding of Series 2008B would get any higher than it is now. If rates stay where they are, it could be. But I kind of feel like rates will go up in the next 4 or 5 years in my mind. That being said, if we do this as an advance as well, we move forward the next call date by the same number of years. So we're not losing anything per se. We have an opportunity in 8 or 9 years to do another redemption and refunding if it makes sense then. But there's some good savings to be had, a pair of options. And what I would propose is let us bring back documentation for consideration of that in September. We'll be back anyway to talk about the fine details on the financing for the COPs. And this is a good topic to bring up in conjunction with that.
So the reason we would be doing this is to save our taxpayers funding.
Correct. How it would effectively work is if we refinance bonds, I stopped sharing. Okay. If we refinance bonds, then the old bonds are retired, new bonds replace that. And when they calculate the tax levies at the county, the amount that they have to calculate for repayment would be that much lower. It goes to each of your taxpayers based upon the value that they have on their property. So those with a higher value property may see a little more benefit than those with the lower value property, but those same people pay a higher overall rate at the end of the day as well.
So the benefit is to the taxpayers.
Totally to the taxpayers.
Period. Okay.
It's a fiduciary thing. Again, you did it in 2017. It's not uncommon. Everyone is kind of where they have the opportunity taking advantage of this environment to refinance these things. Certainly, if we do it, we'll put an article out, to the public and let them know the savings and whatnot, and the benefit to them. Also, if you're ever considering another general obligation bond program, it's a great historical trail to be able to point to and say, hey, this district has always done what it can to save you taxpayers money. We do focus on and take care of your investment in our community via these bonds. And that's what you did in 2017. There's an opportunity to match those savings, maybe even keep them today. If the markets hold where they've been over the last week or so, they've upticked a little bit over the last couple of days, but they hold where they've been, we could really knock this thing out of the ballpark and have a very nice savings number for your taxpayers. But if you believe that, 400,000, which is a little bit more than we did in 2017, is a worthwhile thing to pursue at this point in time, let us put the documentation together, and then we can evaluate things up to the day of pricing. If for some reason it doesn't feel right, doesn't look right, we can always pull the plug.
Comments from the board?
Sounds like the best things to do.
Good.
I like it because, in all honesty, well, it's not in my personal best fiscal interest to push a bunch of deals together and do them at the same time. I could probably make more stringing them out over years. It's the best thing for you guys. It makes the most sense. It saves your staff a lot of time by not going back to financing after financing. And given everything we have to do and solve on the facility side, I'm not saying that GeoBond savings goes back to your general fund, but I'm certainly going to split the cost of obtaining a rating between the two. I'm certainly going to split the cost of producing official statements between the two. And in doing that, that will help save you some money on the facility side. If we can reduce another $25,000, $30,000 of what you owe back to the state at the end of the day, I'm all for it.
Okay, Martha, comments?
So we're talking about floating a new bond, right?
No, simply refinancing what exists.
Refinancing what exists and saving taxpayers.
Oh, I was just adding up my. Okay, I just think property owners would not be happy with us floating a new bond, so yeah, if we can, like, we're refinancing our old bonds.
Yeah.
And it would save the taxpayers.
I don't hear real well. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No,
I'm not hearing Shin real well, so I couldn't really understand that.
Yeah. Basically,
I was trying to.
Basically, by refinancing the bonds with the lower interest rates, we would save taxpayers about $400,000. That's the only.
We're talking
on the property tax.
Well, yeah. Right. Okay. Well, that sounds like a good deal to me.
Yeah.
Okay. I think again, these opportunities present themselves. It's better to take advantage of it. I would agree. I think this is a difficult area for a new bond, but I think showing evidence of doing the right thing on the old bonds will put you in the best position if and when you ever need to look at a new bond.
Okay. Well,
is
there any other questions of Shin?
No, I appreciate all the work you and your team have gone through to bring this to us. And I don't usually understand a lot of finance, but you did an excellent job.
We've been at this some time, and I will relay to the team your words. I really do appreciate it. There have been a lot of people. Your team at Lozano has been, working hard on this. Your team at School Facilities Consultants has been working hard on this. A lot of folks are, trying to get you guys to the right place, and I think we're pretty close.
Okay.
So thank you.
I want to thank you, and I want to move our meeting on. We do
have get out of your hair.
Turn on the air conditioner.
Dry.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so on our agenda, we're still on the superintendent's board report, 6B health and safety COVID update.
Oh, there we go. It feels like we're living 2020 again. So the only thing that I included, it's significant. It's the coronavirus protection plan that we developed for Cal OSHA rules. So Angie Raff has worked on giving updates because there are different procedures, with every new iteration of how we do excluding employees from work now that we have vaccines. And so this is an updated version. that falls under Cal OSHA guidelines. It's called a CDPH. We've had a lot of discussions about how we look at what the guidance that California Department of Public Health puts out, that Cal OSHA puts out as kind of our floor, not our ceiling. We feel like, depending on what is happening locally, we need to really read the community, look at what is happening, and possibly have higher levels of protection for our students and for our staff. So this kind of provides like a minimal procedures for employee safety. We're looking at working with school sites so that when we take our safety protocols, instead of having long documents that people kind of may get lost in at this point, because, you know, at the beginning we have to define and explain so many things, you know, just really shortening things up in terms of what our safety procedures will look like for students and for staff. And CDPH has put out clear guidance. I mean, it's lengthy. I supplied that to you last week, but just for us to kind of get a snapshot, we've been really trying to, you know, put into the newspaper each week. We plan on having in-person instruction. That is what is the direction the state. You know, there's nothing that says we will not do that. The masking requirements are huge, and we got clarification. So, as you know, on Friday, the Napa Valley Tribe moved into the stay-at-home order B with the number of cases. When we were at the meeting, I just clarified some language that to update it, because at stay-at-home order B for the Napa Valley Tribe talked about distance learning, and I just said, well, we have to change that language. We don't, distance learning is something that we are not authorized to do the way that it was created and crafted last year. So they were really responsive. The OES team just put the language in that school is considered an essential function. It's considered an essential place. People may attend school and attend work for educational purposes and other essential functions, like the board meeting is an essential function of the school district. And that stay-at-home order, they're scheduled to revise it or make a decision to maintain it on August 20th. Does not impact school operations in the sense of because we are identified as an essential. And the other good thing is we have been really sticking with our safety protocols. So the widespread surge across the county in the Valley is something that we have not seen at our school sites. Thank everyone who is involved with the functioning of the school, students and families and staff that follow those protocols. That's how we get to go to work. That's how we get to do our instruction. So my last thing is just that while distance learning is out, independent study is something that is offered to families who identify their children as being at risk for attending school in person. We have a survey that is out. There's a QR code in the newspaper. There's a survey link is on the website. I believe Dave Nelly sent out a robo call. It's really important, families. Please let us know if that is something that you require for your child, to let us know so that we can make the appropriate next step in terms of staffing and just getting your kids connected with independence.
I wonder, I was listening to our board member on public comments, and he was saying that in their school district, they were going to require them to identify kids as being that is true from the
Didn't the state directive say that it was the parents' decision?
Yes. So the requirement under AB 130 is we offer independent study, and then if families are choosing that they tell us that's what we need. If the board were to give direction of we want to have verification, that would be something additional, but the state is not requiring that at all. They're saying parents identify that and that they were putting no regulatory piece in it. And I think it's because, I don't know why that language is there, but one advantage is there are special circumstances that are, the whole thing's been a moving target. So I don't know if that's one of the reasons why they just left it open for families. So.
I think it's important to remember too that we have one doctor that's seeing air conditioning. I think it's important to remember too that we have one doctor that's seeing with one pediatrician. And so we would be asking that person. I think we would be creating too much overload on Kamau when we are short doctors. I would be concerned about that.
I'm comfortable with the decision being made by the parents, the guardian. It's my personal.
Yeah, and I think that if we don't offer, what we want to do is create options for families. We know that when families, what the history is, if independent study is often offered by charter schools, and we don't have to do inter-district transfer, so that way, they're overloaded. They can't accept. So we want to make sure that we are creating models that.
So are we getting any pushback from the teachers union or whatever for starting up? Talk about
that. I had a discussion with the two union presidents. We did a meet and confer, just kind of thought, we did some brainstorming. So we still don't have an operations plan. We have plan A is, we in-house provide something because we know our kids and teachers want to be connected to kids. And we have to recognize it is a big workload. Now, we could have an independent study teacher, or the county has a consortium where they can provide services. So all of the districts are still sort of at that place of saying, we don't exactly know what we're going to do, but our first thing is getting our families please respond so that we know at least the number of students. So I think we'll come up with a solution one day together because we want to keep our kids here and have the flexibility for them to be on independent study when health necessitates and be in person when a family says, okay, our restrictions are lifted. And there's a million reasons why people may have have another health and safety. I just want to mention this, that not COVID related, but COVID certainly impacts it. That the Trinity Valley Elementary School is currently housing folks who have been evacuated. That was a development yesterday. I went by the site today. It's not impacted. There's not lots of people. There's somebody with an RV and maybe another person who's staying there. But we have opened that facility for the Red Cross to use for people who've been evacuated out of Burn Ranch and other areas. So I'll keep you updated. It's very sleepy when I was there today. Not a lot of activity, but we expect that will increase.
So when school begins, then
we will have to figure out what will happen.
They have the Veterans Hall that accommodate some people.
That's accommodating the firefighters. Yeah. So we're the last game in town. There's some other area, some other places that will be available, but they're far. So if people want to stay over the hill and Blue Lake, so people need to be nearby for family or animals or anything. This is a good option, and this will literally be a day by day
various sites that talk about
on the Red Cross's website or on
all the other sites.
It used to be all schools.
We just did the authorization.
It used to be all schools. Evacuations are all schools. Emergency. It used to be you can go. The EDCO does say that we are offer our facilities for emergencies, etc. So, and the fire shouldn't last another 3 weeks. Okay, any other reports?
Right? I always have a million things, but no, that's what I committed to reporting on also. So we have things in the newspaper just in terms of trying to get little snippets.
Okay, then we will move into the consent agenda. 7A has been moved as 8B. 7F has been removed from the agenda. So we have 7A, B, C, D, E, G, H, I, J, K, L, and M. So I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
I will second that motion.
Okay. Normally there's no discussion, but that's a long agenda. Everybody's read their packet, I hope. Okay, roll call. E. Yes.
Yes.
Lockwood.
Aye.
The consent agenda is approved. Action items, action 8A, Humboldt, Taiwan Indigenous Cultural Exchange Program. Action item to approve 30 KTJ USD students and 8 chaperones to travel to Taiwan for 10 days in February 2022 as part of the Humboldt, Taiwan Indigenous Cultural Exchange Program. The request is to approve KTJ and USD students and 8 chaperones to travel to Taiwan for 10 days as part of the Humboldt, Taiwan Indigenous Cultural Exchange Program.
Perfect. Hi, folks. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. Is now the time for us to do our presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you all, and thank you to all the board members, and thank you to Superintendent Glick. My name's Colby Smart, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent at the Humboldt County Office of Education. And the team and I were really, really excited to come and share what we've been up to, and also seek approval for a really meaningful project that we've been working towards. But before I get started, I want to acknowledge, the idea that we have travel to Taiwan in the middle of this COVID uptick, it may seem a little like out of place. And so I wanted to let you know a little bit of background. We've actually been working on establishing these relationships with schools in Taiwan back in March when everything looked great. So at the very least, we wanted to come and present to you what we've been building, and then also what our plans are if we seek board approval. So if the team, it looks like the team, everybody's got their cameras on, and so wave, hi, that's great. So I've got a little presentation. Actually, we all have a little presentation. It won't take too long, but we'd love to give you some background on this project, and then give you an opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. Let's see. So you should see my screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if you see my screen? Okay, great. Thanks, Gavin. Let's see. Let me go back all the way to the front. Okay. So real quick, the Humboldt Taiwan Indigenous Youth Cultural Exchange began as a conversation with Margot Robbins, and as a result of a trip I took to present at a conference in Taiwan, in Taipei, Taiwan, in late 2019. actually right before the pandemic. There I went and spoke about international education. And while I was there, I had the good fortune of visiting and learning about the indigenous cultures of Taiwan. Taiwan has 23 distinct indigenous tribes around the island. And as you all probably know, Taiwan's an island that sits off mainland China and is in the Pacific Ocean. So while I was there, I had an opportunity to visit 2 indigenous schools, both in a region called Alishan, which we'll talk about today. In Alishan, there were 2 schools, Alishan Elementary and Sinvi School. What I realized is there's incredible similarities, not just in culture, but also in geography between Humboldt County and this region in Taiwan. And so you can see, this is a picture on the left-hand side. Obviously, this is a picture you all recognize. It's the confluence of the Klamath and Trinity Rivers. And then on the right-hand side is that region called Alishan in Taiwan. This is a picture taken from the schools. I always thought it looked a lot like the Trinity Alps. This is an example of the school there. And again, on the right-hand side is a picture of the geography. So while I was there, again, I realized there was some real deep connections and similarities between Humboldt County and Taiwan. And so when I returned, I gave Margot Robbins a ring and just kind of informed her about my travels and I asked her if she'd be interested in start thinking about what it would look like if we created a connection between schools, indigenous schools in Taiwan and Klamath Trinity School District. So as you can see, focusing on building and giving kids an opportunity to celebrate their cultures, to share their cultures, is not just an opportunity for them to build friendships, but it's really a youth leadership development opportunity. And so there's a picture on the left-hand side of what's called the Zhou tribe, which are the schools that we've been speaking with, and then also some students from kids from the North Coast in Humboldt County. So in the packet that you received, one of the things that we decided that would be important to do is give students in Humboldt County and also the students in Taiwan an opportunity to meet each other virtually before, eventually traveling to Taiwan. And so what the team now is an amazing team. It's Margot, Phil Alpers, Billy Sanderson, Maggie Peters, Tina West, Nation, and then of course the students, which we'll be talking about in just a moment, have been talking about what that virtual opportunity for the schools to meet monthly could look like. And so in the packet that we sent you, there's a list of the various monthly topics that we're going to be meeting about beginning in September. Each month there's a special theme. So for example, in October, it's all about home and tribe. So students will introduce family members and the architectural form of the house, for example, share about locations and characteristics. And we included the Chinese translation in case any of you are fluent in Mandarin. And so leading up to February, the idea is that the students will have had multiple opportunity to learn from each other, to share about each other's cultures, and most importantly, give students the opportunity to share themselves. So this is very much about adults helping kids learn how to share about their cultures. So let's see. So Taiwan is an incredible country. It's a very safe country. It's one of the most democratic countries on earth. And not only will we are planning to have an opportunity for kids to travel to meet the students that they've been working with, but there'll be an opportunity for them to visit really important cultural areas. For example, this is a picture of the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial. On the left is the National Palace of Music. And on the right is the National Palace of Arts. And this is in the city of Taipei. So also in the packet, there's a list of the itinerary that we have been working on with our colleagues over in Taiwan. And just so you know, we've been meeting and sort of visioning out what this could look like all the way back since April. And originally, we were going to start the virtual exchange in May, but then Taiwan, for the first time, actually had COVID enter the island. They actually managed to never close their schools up until last May. So we'll have time if you have any questions about this. I'm not sure if the hyperlinks that if you got a digital version of the packet, all of those are hyperlinked to the various places that we're planning on visiting. So the neat thing is, originally, it was just a virtual exchange, but then the folks over in Taiwan said, well, we've got this ceremony, this cultural ceremony in the Zhou tribe called the Mayazdi Festival. And this happens in mid-February each year. And it's one of the three main festivals in the Zhou tribe in the region called Alishan. And they actually invited us personally to come take part in this festival. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. We have Gavin here, who's graciously decided and agreed to come and talk a little bit about what this opportunity will mean to him. So Gavin, go ahead.
Hello. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. What it means to me? Well, first of all, this is a huge opportunity. I don't think I've ever traveled this far before. So that's pretty exciting. Also the culture part. I think that is very important to hold on to for forever, really. What culture means to me is how we identify ourselves as an individual and also what we do as a community. So I think it would be really awesome and cool to learn what other countries do as a community and what their cultures are. So
that's great. Gavin, thank you. Thank you so much for coming to share. Really appreciate that. And now we're going to turn it over to Phil, and he's going to talk a little bit about bridging cultures. Go ahead, Phil.
Hey, Nanistaway, Phil Albers, na kada kuara, Pananikia Wichwa, kada travel TANF program. So my name is Phil Albers, and I have 4 children attending Klamath Trinity Joint Unified School District. And I work for the Qatar Travel TANF program. I've done a lot of work. I've worked with Colby before, and I used to work for the school district, in case some of you didn't know. And I've done a lot of work with Margot and the Indian Education Program, including teaching Kaduk language as a certified teacher from the Kaduk tribe and recognized through the state. But once I kind of found out some more about this from Colby and Margot and Billy, I got really excited because this bridging of cultures and this ability to have our students and our youth of this community have interaction on such a huge scale is really unprecedented, especially in a historical context. So it's invaluable experiences for everybody that's involved, whether it's directly going there or just being a part of the process. And by that, I mean, this can enhance your own cultural knowledge and understanding, because in order to share something or teach it, you need to understand it. And that innately causes some reflection for you to be able to explain yourself. And with this group and being guided by these mentors, I feel really good about it, that these students are going to receive the ability to gain some of that introspective on themselves as individuals, on their family values, and then on this community as a whole. and that it would include protocols for having visitors come to your homeland. What do you expect of some strangers or some outsiders coming here? How should they act? How should you treat them? What should that interaction be like? All those things need to be at minimum thought of in order for this to happen. And then, of course, when you're going somewhere else, how are you representing your community, your family, yourself as an individual? And that goes hand in hand with enhancing your own appreciation and understanding of your own culture, as well as wherever you're going to visit. And then opening your eyes to, well, there's all these other cultures, and experiencing that diversity and what that can do for a young mind that's a sponge, just ready to soak up all of this information and capable of processing it in a meaningful way. It's incredible. And then, of course, since I am a bit of a language buff, being able to actually see that successfully communities can fluently speak and interact in multiple languages within one society is incredible. Like being able to do that here. And I know Klamath Trinity's very supportive of indigenous languages here, and encouraging the use of language on campus and throughout the community. And this is an opportunity where they can actually see, because if I'm not mistaken, Colby, in Taiwan, they actually post and utilize several different languages at these schools, right? Yeah, so just the simple exposure of actually seeing that happen is inspiring all by itself. So, and I could go on, but I think that sums it up pretty good. And I'm really excited about it. Also, from my work has tentatively agreed to support this project as much as they can, given the restrictions of the actual federal and state funding guidelines of a temporary assistance for needy families program. But they do support the concept, and they are supporting me assisting and cooperating and participating with this project as a mentor, as a cultural practitioner, and then of course as a parent for kids in this community. And one last thing I'd like to say is to make a reference to a traditional or a historic pre-contact context. Imagine the feat that it was for somebody from here, even a Yurok person in Klamath at the mouth of the Klamath River, to travel that distance. Taiwan, Hawaii, all the way up to Alaska, all the way down into Southern California. It's phenomenal in that context, but it happened. And what those interactions and what those relationships brought to the entire people and community in the whole Klamath River, through trade, through routes, through materials, through that expansion of thought, you just can't value that. You can't place anything on that. So I think it's incredible that this opportunity is happening for these kids here. And yeah, so hopefully that wasn't too much.
That was great, Phil. Thank you so much. And hey, to your point, Phil, you're absolutely right. To give you an example, we talked a little bit about this. Principals in tribal schools in Taiwan are required to be certified fluent in the home language. So that's just an example of what you were talking about. So thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so Margot is actually going to talk a little bit about who is going and how they were selected. Margot, you want to take it away?
Ayakui now Margot Robbins, Keechnak Indian Education Director, Mesku Klamath Trinity School District. We have students from 3 Klamath Trinity schools participating, students from Orleans, Hoopa-El, and Hoopa Valley High School, students in 6th through 12th grades. And the chaperones are a cross-section of Klamath Trinity staff. There are 4 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff who is an Indian education cultural consultant for the school district. We have an employee from Two Feathers as a chaperone, somebody from the Yurok Education Department, and Phil from the Kuruk tribe. So we have 8 chaperones and between 28 to 30 students. The selection process was set up to target students who are actively participating in their cultural lifeways. I went to a couple of staff people who are active in the cultural community to help look at the students who submitted essays or some form of application, I guess you could say. We didn't want to base it on scholastic aptitude or achievement. We wanted it to be open to all students. And so in order to participate, students needed to provide either an essay, a PowerPoint, a small little video, even a little selfie recording of what culture means to them. As it happened, we had 29 students submit these what culture means to them in one form or another, and so we accepted all 29 students. Those 29 students came from the schools that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please, Colby.
Sure.
Safety measures. First, I would like to say that we have checked with the district's insurance, JPA, and the travel is covered under our regular insurance. COVID-19 precautions. We will only travel COVID conditions allowing. If it is unsafe to travel when February gets here, we will postpone the trip. We are not in any way going to put the health of our students at risk by traveling under unsafe conditions. We have talked with the health center on campus, and they will be able to give students the COVID test prior to departure. We will be wearing masks on the plane and following strict COVID protocols. Other safety precautions involve having a small student chaperone ratio. We have 1 chaperone for every 4 students, plus an additional chaperone, just in case maybe a student isn't feeling well and doesn't want to go out and about that day. Then 1 chaperone could stay behind with that student while the rest still have a full small student chaperone ratio. We plan on securing some what we call bling for students. So as we're traveling, all students will be wearing like a windbreaker with some sort of, all the same color with some sort of emblem on it, so that they're easily picked out in a crowd in case somebody starts to stray from the crowd or something like that. We realize that parents are going to be very concerned about being able to communicate with their child. And so Billy has done a lot of research into what kinds of options we would have to ensure good communication. There are 3 things to consider: the student chaperone communication. Prior to leaving, we will have many interactions with our students and their parents, and so we all know each other really well. there'll be no question about who's in your group because you only have 4 students in your group, and we have met together many times learning about Taiwan and what we're going to expect when we're there, and just really getting to know each other. All of the students will have more than one chaperone's phone number, as will parents. So when we're over there, there are some options that we can use to ensure reliable communication. One is that before we leave, students can get a SIM card that will work over there, change their SIM card. They can get a different plan, add an additional plan to their current plan so that they can have international calling. And then there's also some phone apps that they can use where students can actually follow their child from place to place via phone. And the other third leg of this stool is chaperone parent communication. Parents will have all of the chaperones' phone numbers. They will know where we're at during the day and where we're staying at in the evenings. So we are going to make sure that there are very clear lines of communication. And finally, I think one of the most important things is the personal relationships that will be built between chaperones and students and parents, and also the relationships that are built between the students from Klamath Trinity and the students in Taiwan, that we will have established bonds, and the chaperones that were picked because they have strong relationships with students. They have that personality trait that has shown to be responsible and also child friendly, I guess you could say. They get along with kids and kids respect their authority. So those are the safety measures that we put in place. And at the end of the presentation, I'm sure you may have some questions, and we'll answer them at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. And then Tina, she's here with Tikwa. Tina, you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about your parents? Hi, Tina. I think your connection's a little, can you say something again?
Sure. My internet is a little wonky, so I'm afraid I won't turn on my, I don't know if it's going to work.
Yeah, it's good. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Hey, young everyone. You may know me as Miss Tina. I'm third grade teacher at Hoopa L, but tonight I'm coming to you as a parent. My youngest daughter was selected to attend and to her application and was ultimately selected, and I kind of went through a whole roller coaster of emotions, very like nervous and anxious and, curious about
Tina, I think you're breaking up.
To work, and then which led me to do research.
They're not going to have that kind of phone.
Okay, Tina, you're breaking up. So, but thank you.
In the end, after understanding the process and learning more about it, I have gone from being a little bit like skeptical to being like wholeheartedly supportive of this.
Perfect. Tina, thank you. Thank you so much. So everyone, we included some bulleted thoughts for Tina as well. And then I'm not sure, Tikwa is here, Tina's daughter, and I'm not sure if she's able to say anything, but their connection's a little, and in the interest of time, we're gonna just go ahead and move on. Unless, Tikwa, can you hear us okay? Okay. Anyway, so Tikwa is one of the students that applied. And so at some point you'll get to hear from her. And so this is a quote by Bronk Colgrove. And so if you want to just take a moment, and I'd be happy to share these slides with everyone. This was one of the responses to the question, what does culture mean to me, that Margot was mentioning. Okay, so just some next steps to wrap everything up. So our next step, if the board approves of us moving forward, we're going to secure additional funding. You know, our goal is to make sure any student who is going on this trip is not denied this opportunity based on, you know, financial constraints. We want to make sure that all parts of this trip, maybe with the exception of pocket money, are taken care of, because, you know, we've talked about the importance of kids having that opportunity to raise a little money for their own spending. But the big stuff is we're going to make sure that that's taken care of. And I included a budget in the packet. So we're going to begin our cultural exchange via Zoom beginning in September. And we're actually putting together, the students are putting together a cultural care package, which we're physically going to send over to Taiwan, and the Taiwanese students are doing the same. So we're planning on having parent-student chaperone information nights. And so I'm envisioning, and we're envisioning, that this will probably happen, well, as much as needed or desired, but certainly 2 or 3 times between now and February. So Margot, did you want to, feel free to jump in if I miss anything.
I think that pretty much covers it, other than we will be helping students to secure passports, and parents providing the support that they need, as well as monitoring the COVID conditions. We haven't moved forward on any of this until we're able to hopefully receive board approval for the trip.
Perfect. Thank you, Margot. Yeah, Phil?
Yeah, and I'd just like to add also that includes securing additional resources and support from the tribes and some of the other programs and agencies that do have an investment in the community and the youth and the families here. I know as a team, we've talked about what some other options are, but we've held back on reaching out to some of these other programs and potential resources until we do for sure feel like this is something we really can move forward with, starting at the school. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Because that directly applies to my job also. So
thank you so much. One thing I do want to point out is the Ministry of Education in Taiwan is actually offered to pay for all our internal travel and lodging. So that's, you know, we didn't even seek that. They said, hey, you know, we think we can do this. So that's a big chunk of the cost already. So with that, we're just going to open it up to any questions that you might have, or thoughts or advice, or just general questions. So thank you, everyone.
Okay. Yes, this is obviously a very unique, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. On the budget, though, I see the budget there, but I don't see where the cost will be coming from, unless it's the district for the teachers and anybody else that we have to have substitutes for. So is this 10 school days? Is this how many actual school days? What obligations are we taking on as the board for expenses?
Thank you so much for asking that question. So the Mayaspi Festival, the exact dates are decided by the elders in the Joe tribe in late August. So we're right around that time. So the fixed dates that this festival will happen, which we're building the trip around, it's a 3-day festival, it typically happens in mid-February. So ideally it would fall within the President's Week holiday, but we can certainly build in any additional costs to the district For example, substitutes to cover the travel of the teachers. We can build that into the budget, and we can make sure. Over and above the teachers missing time, the 2 teachers missing time, I don't anticipate any additional encroachment on the district, because our goal is that, first of all, we would identify outside sources. Phil mentioned tribal agencies, other organizations. I've actually been in contact with the American Institute of Taiwan, which is the US version of our embassy over there. And there's just to learn about what the funding possibilities are. So our goal is this would have minimal to no impact on the district. I hope that answers your question.
Any other discussion, comments? I mean, I don't know. I thought that the board had some time back made a ruling that for some reason, insurance purposes or something, that students could not travel out of the district or go on field trips or whatever, like all the 8th grade and senior trips have been canceled, right?
That was for different reasons.
Different reasons, and this
that was for different reasons.
So that was okay.
The last trip I think we had was a football team or some team going to Hawaii at one point. That's the last one I remember. So.
Yeah, because otherwise it sounds like a really, great thing for kids to do and well planned out, and they have everything, it looks like, in order. I would say would be great.
So now, if do you have substitute chaperones?
Yes, we're
lined up.
We do. We've got all the all the chaperones identified, and so there's the total of 8 chaperones with the 1 additional one. Depending on the the availability, and this wouldn't be a cost at all, is I may, my wife may be traveling with us as well, so she would be another adult who potentially could fill in as an additional chaperone.
Yeah. So only 2 of the.
Go ahead, Margot.
Only 2 of the Climate Trinity chaperones are teachers. So the other 3 is Billy.
I was wondering if you had substitutes if one came down with COVID or something and couldn't go. I would maybe suggest looking at parents of some of the students as possible alternatives.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Phil, did you have something to say?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was actually going to say that right before you and Margot had the talk where there are multiple parents that have expressed interest in being an alternate or a potential stand-in should one of the chaperones be unavailable or that become needed at some point. And just so far, obviously I haven't run any checks or verified credentials of any kind, but they've already been active in the school district and considered or at least in the previous school year deemed eligible to volunteer and be on campus with background checks and that. So there's no shortage of people saying, I would love to go with my kid to Taiwan.
Okay, Martha, do you have any comments?
Just a bite of food.
I do. Sorry, I just took the ice cream. So, my question is going to be to you, Lorlee. How closely related does a person going on the trip have to be for me to be having to abstain from this vote?
And I think that matters.
No, you should be okay. You should be okay to vote, I think.
Well, you're not
It is
the only
really
you're not
close.
the only board member
Yeah.
who has family going.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's fine. If they agree to it, then.
Can you hear us, Martha?
So I could vote on this.
Yeah, we're not seeing that there's
I
a
can't
conflict.
really hear you.
We're not seeing that there's
Okay,
a conflict.
all right.
Unless you own the Taipei Airlines.
No. Okay.
Yeah, then you're okay. Thanks for
Good to know.
asking that.
Okay. Any discussion? Tom?
In terms of procedure now, what are we giving a general go-ahead, short of having an actual budget in place? Would that be the proper step?
We could vote on it contingent upon the budget being in place.
They're not asking for money from us, though.
Well, that's
contingent.
That's
upon
what
our-
I'm saying. Contingent upon it not costing. Should a shortfall come up or something, and again, like the district does have to have substitutes for the teachers. We don't know how many days, and what's the rate for a sub nowadays?
150.
150 plus statutory. So that would be the only possible cost to the district.
There's 9,000.
Would
9,000.
The education department's going to pay 9,000.
we need to ask that the students do some kind of independent study to get so that we don't lose an ADA?
If it is a school, I understand if it's a school sponsored field trip, then
a journal.
Then the attendance counts. That's correct, Colby?
That's correct.
Count it as activity.
Activity, yeah.
That's correct. And then also, you know, we also planned to have enrichment and reflective opportunities built into this trip. So the kids will have that opportunity to journal. In fact, we want them to journal and share their experiences with their friends and family back home. So, but to answer your question, yes, if it's a school activity.
Any other questions of the board? Comments?
I'd like to put on that list.
So what? Okay, I will entertain a motion since this is an action item to approve the trip to Taiwan.
I'll make a motion. I make a motion to approve.
Debbie moves to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Bob seconds.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote.
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Waddy?
Yes.
Long?
Yes.
Myers? Colgrove?
So
Martha?
Martha. Yes, okay. Unanimous, the motion is approved. So
Thank you so much.
okay, so we move on to action item 8B, the declaration of need for qualified teachers. I will entertain a motion. The governing board is being asked to adopt a declaration certifying that there is an insufficient number of certificated persons who meet the district specified employment criteria for the positions listed on the attached form.
I'll make a motion.
Kadusha moves. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Rob seconds. Discussion.
I'm not really clear on what does that mean. If it means more than just the teaching credential that they need, I don't understand. What are you talking about?
What's this mean?
So this would allow us throughout the school year, because it would be for 1 year. It would authorize us to hire teachers that do not have their full credential. So the state allows for what they used to call emergency credentials. They have different names now. So there's waivers, what's called a short-term staff permit. It's only allowable for 1 year. You know, Debbie, it's in the consent agenda.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
So it it's also, the staffing it's kind of a moving number. We have done some interviews. We may have less than these numbers to create those waivers. So we basically apply for a credential for a teacher through the county to get a temporary permit, because it takes the California Teaching Commission like months to file and get the paperwork done. Okay. So after we have, our goal is to have fully credentialed teachers in every position, and we have to make exceptions because overall, we don't, across the state, people will have to go with interns who are currently getting their credential while they're working, pretty big task. What's called a STIP, the short-term staffing permit, and another one called a PIP. So there's different, which is a provisional intern permit. So there's different levels of emergency waivers. So if there are any vacancies, we have to have this option so we can hire somebody under one of those waivers. And then one of the other pieces in this is that with the number of jobs that we were flying, we know that we have this kind of, it reflects historical trends of people going out on leave for family medical leave, leaving the area mid-year, and then this would allow us to fill something swiftly.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Yeah, I've done it before at my other district. It's a complicated process, but the end result is good. Yeah, we get to fill our positions.
And we always need teachers.
Yeah, we always have positions.
No, it's good. It's people's credential. It's definitely worth asking about. It's the credentialing process. It's a pretty mistakes. So thank you.
Any other questions? Martha, do you have a question? Comment? I see your mouth moving, but.
Yeah, that wasn't for you guys.
Oh.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Any other discussion? If not, roll call vote.
Roll call. McLaughlin. Martha.
Aye.
O'Gorman.
Aye.
George.
Aye.
Whitey.
Aye.
Wow.
Aye.
Myers. Colgrove. Yes.
Unanimous. The declaration of need for qualified teachers has been approved. Okay, we will move into reports and information. Assistant Superintendent for Business Personnel Board report.
I am presenting the 45-day update just for your review. And this is a 45-day review from the original budget adoption. The governor has passed his budget. So we had a change in our LCFF funding, as well as a change in student education. So those are the only two revenues after the 45-day update that have a difference. And the total revenue is $281,112, and the expenditures is the $261,790. What's not reflected in the expenditures is the indirect cost rate of about $19,999, I believe. So that's where you're going to see a difference of about $20,000 between the revenue and the expenditure. And so our budget now is a reflection of the governor's approved budget. And as we all know, there was a 5.07% COLA increase. And just to give you an idea, what that increased amount from last year to this year was a total of $663,838. And that was an increase to our LCFF funding. Now, taking that into consideration, I broke down some costs from last year to this year on our increases just at the beginning of the year regarding budget adoption. So at the beginning of the year in services for electricity and water, we had an increase of about $15,000 $311. Our step-in column for our certificated staff was a total of $84,873. Classified was a total of $65,984. Confidential, $4,448. Confidential management, $828. Certificated management, $14,247. Now, keeping in mind, our step-in column includes every position that we have. So in a normal first interim, second interim, we take a snapshot usually. So you would see a little bit lower amount for step-in column because we don't take into consideration those vacant positions. At budget adoption, you have to take in those vacant positions that roll from previous year into this year. You have to take all that into consideration. It might even be just a step-on column one just for those vacants, but they are included in that cost. Moving on to STIRS, there was an increase of $196,155. For PERS, there was an increase of $271,322. In our SUI, our unemployment, there was an increase of $45,305. The total of those increases, just starting out the year on our budget, is $698,474. So the amount we received, $663,838. We are just starting the year, we have already exceeded what the state has provided us by $34,636. So that kind of gives you a general idea of with our budgets and adopting what those costs are upfront before we even begin the year. We're already, we've exceeded what that COLA represented to our district. I thought I should make you aware of that those costs are there. It's a little bit easier to talk numbers versus percentages because it's a little bit more of a reality of, well, how much does that cost? Well, we had, STIRS is 16.92%. What does that mean? What does that mean? Because you wouldn't know the total cost of STIRS unless we were looking exactly at that. So I kind of broke it down a little bit for you in regards to what the cost actually was. That is basically all that I have on the 45-day update. We're starting our first interim process already, and so we'll have that for you in a couple of months. So just to keep you updated, that was quick. And do you have any questions that hopefully I can answer right now?
Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions, comments from any?
I just want to remind the board of the charge that you have and what the business office has to do is to prepare and propose a budget to be adopted before the state legislature passes its budget. And it sounds like a crazy exercise. And so schools do this every year. And then, so this 45-day update is really, this is so much more accurate because we do know what kinds of funding went through. I appreciate the clarification about taking percentages and making it into money because, again, 5.07 was on one fund, one source of revenue. It's not across the board. And then, looking at the real dollars of our operations. And so we're really grateful that the state of California went, it's probably going to cost you more to run your school. We're going to increase this. And we can see, we have these different areas that the increases were there. But yeah, this is super helpful because now all of the legislative pieces are settled. And ask questions if it's important. Please don't act like if you don't understand. I mean, school finance is complicated. So, always ask questions, please.
I do have a question. On the list of expenditures, where are the confidential employees expenditures listed?
For this part, they're in classified salaries. They're in the 2000. They're absorbed in for the overall cost.
Okay. So your classified employees would be in the object of 2000, and it says classified salaries. However, the employee benefits, they are all included in the
I've never liked that. I would like for them to be broken out, all of our benefits, everything. Yes.
This is how our accounting system in our state runs. They use the general major range, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Carmi. 9B, first reading draft board policy regulation 4031, complaints concerning discrimination in employment. So this is the first reading. It takes 2 board meetings to pass the board policy. So hopefully you all read it. You have questions, have any concerns, please bring them forth. Okay, trustee area reports, or do we have any reports?
I didn't get out around this last month. I'm babysitting grandkids, so I never got a chance to get down to the school or any of the other schools really and see what how they were doing. But I was curious about how did we work it out with the teacher's aide at Jack Norton, and I see that that's been worked out, and now we're going to be looking for a cook custodian, right?
I don't know what the process of if that's being formed right at the moment, but yeah, staffing has
changed,
been mobile, and we're getting some solid staffing in.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
But you won't start the year without a cook custodian, right?
No, they will. Probably might have to. I don't know. It's so late. I don't know anybody.
Well, the other thing in terms of food service, there's I just read the report when we had the site visit. So I think we'll talk to Becky about some. We will have food services.
Right.
Absolutely. Sometimes it may require, more transportation and less on site. But
I was curious about that report from the guy that did he did a survey,
yes. And he visited all the sites, and I just read it. Yeah.
And so you have that report now?
I do. Yeah, I just got it. And, so I haven't even talked to the food service director about it. We haven't connected, but yeah, it was good. He had lots of good things to say. Has recommendations as well.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
I do have a comment. So this is a comment to any principals or teachers that might be listening. I understand that reading and writing are the largest, the biggest measurement of how a student might succeed, but having something exciting to read or write about might be useful. So I want to remind teachers and principals that a farm is a very good source of supplies. If any teachers or principals need any growing supplies, I have lots of plants, including but not limited to Native American food plants. Oh, and I have some yew trees growing. Larry Alameda did find me some yew tree seeds, and so I do have some yew trees growing. But so any teachers or principals that need some supplies, I will donate them.
Thank you. Any other? No? Okay. I would just like to again compliment our administrative staff, our superintendent, our assistant superintendent for all of the work you've been through. I know it's been a horrendous, unusual year, but I think I see progress being made, and I am pleased. And I'm also thankful for all of our employees that have been out there working, summer school staff, helping all of us get through this pandemic year. And we will do our diligent best to keep our kids safe once they return back to school here in a few weeks. So who knows what 2 or 3 weeks will bring us, but we will navigate through it. And I have all confidence in our superintendent and assistants to keep our district in good shape. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And thank you for reminding everybody that we've had people working all summer.
Yes.
And I appreciate your bringing that up. So there are some people you don't say, how was your summer vacation? They've been cleaning and they've been moving things, or they have been, taken time to be part of the summer learning program. So thanks for that.
Okay, so we have one discussion item, a request from Joe Davis, Hupa Tribal Chairman, for meeting with Board of Trustees in August. And I would like to remind our board that we do have an Indian Policies and Procedures Board policy. It is Board Policy 0410.1. And it is about 5 pages, but there's one section here regarding special meetings. It says the district board will schedule and hold upon request an open special meeting with Karuk tribal representatives, Hupa tribal representatives, Yurok tribal representatives, Sanungwe representatives, and parents to add modifications of educational programs. So it is in our board policies that we will schedule and hold meetings upon request. So with that, in our board policies, it's also tied directly to our impact aid funding, which brings in over $5.5 million to our district. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the requirements of receiving that funding. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so discussion.
Well, and I just want to say that the tone of the request was very much an invitation for a partnership between the tribe. This was when Joe Davis came over to my office and is really looking for, we have this a shared interest, and agencies, just like any other, institutions, often operate individually when we all want the same thing, or we the way to get there is where we have to have the communication. So it was very inviting, and I'm looking forward to what the next steps look like. I said, well, I don't think you guys will fit in our boardroom, so can we be invited over to your council chambers? So we can set that up. I did talk to Joe. I asked about the agenda. So he said that they can prepare the agenda, but I felt like, open if there's talking points. I don't think it would be for any sort of actions to happen, but just for there to be a study session so that we can say, okay, what are the goals that we have for our students and how can we work together?
So are they inviting us to go to their boardroom, or they want an invitation to come here?
We can go over there.
Oh, that sounds good. I think that's nice.
We'll fit better as well.
Yeah, we should definitely do that.
Can we go over there and discuss as a board?
I think if it's agendized as an open study session, we would just agendize the points that we want to discuss. I can't see that there would be action to be taken because.
So you just read the board policy, and it included all the different tribes in the area. Was that to be at one meeting or as many meetings as possible?
There's also the policy is about 5 pages long. Mm-hmm. And we do have opportunities at each of our board meetings for representatives of the tribes or parents to address the board on Indian policies and procedures at any meeting. We also have a spring meeting that we're supposed to have. We have our impact aid meetings. I think they're, monthly, bi-monthly, whatever.
And we did have our spring meeting, remember?
And there's a spring meeting. There's also a fall meeting. But in addition, special meetings was what I was reading. The district board will schedule and hold, upon request, an open special meeting with Karuk tribal representatives,
Hupa Tribal representative, New York Tribal representative, Southern representatives, and parents to add modifications of educational programs. So it's, I think what it is talking about what's going on. I don't see action items at this point, although we are, one of the agenda items should be around our industrial technology building. We're going to be asking various tribes, College of the Redwoods, of what they can submit. Maybe something that we could ask the tribe to do is do some lobbying for us in DC for impact aid construction monies. That would be something that they could do. So it's a discussion of what I see of how we can jointly improve our programs.
And then in the past, isn't there always been a tribal representative here from the education department? I mean, I know Margot we have, but then Jim McClellan, or then wasn't it one of
they've been coming in on Zoom, but it's
they have been, okay.
Yeah.
But it might be good to reissue that invitation because I do notice that.
I can't hear you.
It might be good for us to reissue that invitation maybe at the special meeting to their education departments to participate, because I do notice that participation is kind of weaned a little bit.
Well, I think, isn't Erica still out? She was.
We send, when you all get your meeting notification, they're included.
Yeah, it might be important for us to offer that invitation to our tribal leaders so that those programs are directed to have that communication. That might be important.
The impact aid meetings are for tribal chairs and educational directors for each tribe. However, the chairs usually just appoint their education directors to go because they have a million things on their plate that they're dealing with.
A comment. It was pointed out that our boardroom is too small to invite all of them, so perhaps we would go there. What about a meeting in, say, a bigger room in our district, such as a cafeteria or something, to which we invite all three of the tribes? I'm concerned that if we, I'm concerned about two things. One, if we go to the Hupa tribal offices, it would be impolite if we didn't return the visit to the other tribal offices.
Well, they have the opportunity to invite us also.
Right. And I'm also concerned that it was pointed out that the presentator of the last meeting pointed out that there are ways that groups can meet, different organizations can meet, but she did use the term, say that it's complicated. Now, even if we didn't follow, if we didn't have any action items, it would still be, we would still could possibly putting ourselves at risk if we, for example, talked about something that might be an action item in the near future. My understanding of the Brown Act is that even if it's not an action item now, if we all discuss something that might be an action item, if we know.
It will be a public meeting. It's not like we're having a serial meeting or a private.
So would it be agendized?
It has to be agendized. So I think that's where the broad agenda, and like here, to add modifications of educational programs, that's broad. And there could be others. Any other concerns? Or?
Would we still be following Brown Act rules?
Yes.
And does the Hupa tribe follow Brown Act rules?
No.
So we would have to be on our toes. I guess it still looks to me like the politest way to do it would be to have, and to meet the requirement of this would be to, for example, send upon that request, to respond to that request by representatives of our board going to their meetings, just as we invite representatives of their board to our meetings. But if the board is to travel as a group, I would hope that we would do it fairly, and it would look to me somewhat risky to operate outside of the Brown Act.
I think the Hoopa tribe does follow the Brown Act. I know they do suspend the rules at some point for specific items to be added to their agenda, but I'm under the impression that they do follow.
I don't share your concerns one bit. I know you're the one that keeps us on our toes with the Brown Act and all of that, parliamentarian, but I'm not concerned that the tribe has invited us over there. We have their children. They generate over a third of our budget that we run our school district with, and they have the right under federal law to have their say on what programs their kids are in. I don't foresee, I think we're astute enough that we can navigate around any possible muddy waters off, but I would like to see a discussion of possible projects to work on together. For instance, we have that, okay, so right now we've got the ITech building. Is there anything that they can help us with? We have the ethnic studies requirement coming down that school districts should offer ethnic studies, but it's at the local school districts choice of what they teach about their history of their tribe. There is very little, if any, history of this area that has out there. Our students, our community, very few know the history of this region. And that is something that the Hoopa Valley Historical Alliance has been working on for over 20 years. We've gotten the Adobe building listed on the Register of Historical Places. And it's envisioned that there be an educational interpretive center where people can go and study, no matter what your background, on what the history of this place has been. I have gone into classroom after classroom. I have talked to community members, and it's very rare that I run into anybody that even knows that we are sitting on the Fort Gaston grounds, and that our school district started out as a fort. People don't know that. They don't know their own history. They don't know that the westward movement, as we study in our social studies books, ended right here in Hoopa. There's so much out there that I think the vision of those that started the Historical Alliance 20 years ago said that it's empowering to know your own history, and that your ancestors were ones that, what did they do? We don't hear it from our perspective. We read it in different non-Indian books and stuff, but they don't hear it from this side. And until our people know their identity and where they came from and what their ancestors went through to leave this reservation to the Hoopas, because it was unheard of in that day and age for any tribe to retain title to their ancestral lands. So that's another whole thing that they could help us with, is that ethnic studies historical part. We already have school, Captain John over here in their site report. The two teachers there have been working on this project and having students become docents. And they've got it in their report here that they're going to continue to make adobe bricks whenever the pandemic lifts. So there's a lot of common things I think that we can talk about in the future that I would like to see all tribes come together, but each has their own individual areas where their own individual issues that are maybe different. There's a lot of similarities, but anyway, so that's one of the things that I like to pursue.
And I have something I'd like to pursue, and that is for a number of years, I've been trying to grow an oak tree forest in our school system. I haven't been very successful yet, but I would love to talk to the Hupa tribe about helping us pursue that project. As I just pointed out, I have a lot of Native American food projects, and I am of the opinion that it's wonderful that our school system spends a lot of money on technology, but I believe that technology is a tool, but life is the goal, life and health. So here's a short story, if I could. Can I tell just a quick story? We have an oldest daughter who's an engineer now. She was about in, she was younger than the 4th grade, but I don't remember how young, when she came into the house and said, what are those plants up behind the graves? So this was back in the early 70s, and I was part of the hippie Back to Nature movement. And I said, they're nothing, they're just some old plants. They were and she said, oh no, they're really healthy. So I, as a father, at that point, I did realize that I had to stop growing my own. But I was also proud that by this age, she had learned that to tell the difference between alive and healthy. And then so I thought, well, what if when we graduated a student from high school, they knew that, that they could know, Sally, I'm worried about you. Or so that's part of my interest in growing plants in the school system. Computers are useful, but they're not going to teach. If we had fish growing like John Mason used to do at Trinity Valley every year, if we had fish growing in the classrooms, if we had oak trees growing, that would be, I think, a wonderful way. So yes, I agree that there is much we could talk about. There's something about the format of that I'm less than comfortable with, but I would probably go along with it if everyone else was comfortable. I was thinking there could be some other way of doing it. But do we have a lot to talk about? Absolutely. I still have a vision. I still have my oak trees growing, and as I pointed out earlier, I have some yew trees growing. What if those could be used? And I have lots of elderberries and lots of huckleberries. What if those could be used as a hook to get the student interested in writing or reading? Because, so I believe, yes, we have lots to talk about. I would love to have the Hupa tribe help with growing an oak forest.
I'm talking about like returning to the oak woodland. Is that what you're thinking, or kind of like an oak ecosystem kind of project? Because that's a great idea.
Oh yeah, I do have a description written by a white man of passing through Hupa on his landing in Trinidad and passing through Hupa on his way to the gold fields, and he does describe tall grass and scattered giant oak trees. I think any tendency to romanticize about anybody's past is a little bit dangerous, but at the same time, it's a beautiful picture. And I just think, what if the students were planting oak trees? And that's what we tried to do. We gave it a try. And I think I have one oak tree. There is one oak tree left. We planted them with kindergartners. They were acorns that students come to my farm and get pumpkins. And I charge them some money because I give them a lesson on how does a farmer make a living. And so but I also acknowledge that some students can't afford. So I'm willing to barter, and I accept acorns for pumpkins. And I've grown a bunch of oak trees with those acorns. And so this was part of that project. And the idea was to get some oak trees growing.
Are they can oaks?
Yes, well, I have a lot of different kinds of oaks, but Margot did ask for 10 oaks at Hoopa L, and we did plant them. And in terms of a climate trinity project, I think if we had a long-term vision, but this is where the Hoopa tribe could come in, if we had a long-term vision to tackle this, to try to stimulate interest in kids, it would take some thought to the maintenance department, because we would be burdening them with taking care of trees. So we might need to come up with some funding that would pay for irrigation, that would add a person, but that person could be a student, it could be a vocational student. My idea was that if a student planted something young and saw it grow over a period of 18 years, that might be a wonderful experience. So yes, I agree that we have much to talk to the Hoopa tribe about, and I'm glad that they come here, and I hope we can figure out a way to communicate. There was something about the actual format of us having a meeting in their office that does make me uncomfortable, but I don't know that I'll fight it.
Can I just add a couple of the procedural? So I want to also let the board know I'm going to the Yurok Tribal Council meeting tomorrow. So I may come out with an invitation from that meeting. That was when I reached out to Jim, and we were talking about just providing services. So I think that we can get started with that. I think also in terms of, I really do think that the tribal council does want the entire board there, because that way we share a message and a vision. And I appreciate the idea of delegation and sending people, but I think that really gives us an opportunity to commune. And I think that if we maintain it as exploratory and discussion, and just that we all just check that we're not going down a road and making decisions, I don't think that we will do that, because I think we will cover broad topics and say, hey, I have a specific interest in industry and entrepreneurship, and I think that we'll be able to tackle that. But I did want to share those other points with you all.
And they have a beautiful boardroom. It's way better than this. They have huge, big redwood tables and chairs in there. It's a really nice place. It's not frightening or scared. You shouldn't be nervous at all to go into a place like that. It'd be like going to the White House.
I'm familiar with the boardroom. I've been in it.
Yeah.
Well, some beautiful
I'm ready to go home. I'm sorry.
aerial photographs in there.
No, I gotta go.
Okay. Do we have any other business?
That was it.
Okay.
Just to adjourn.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Carrie moves to adjourn. Rob seconds. Roll call vote.
Jocelyn. Martha, roll call.
To adjourn.
To adjourn.
You give a thumbs up.
Tom.
Oh, yes.
George.
Yes.
Lottie.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Myers.
E.
Coolgrove.
No, I want to stay here.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
David. Meeting is adjourned.
I'm surprised you didn't.